Hey everyone, it's me. I just got back from a stretch of highway near Kerrville, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around what I saw. Just a couple days ago, July 4th, a flash flood hit central Texas with almost no warning. The Guadalupe River surged over 20 feet in less than 2 hours. Entire camps were washed out. Dozens of people are missing. Over 100 are confirmed dead. What happened out there wasn't just a weather event. It was something else. I was out, near the edge of that storm zone with a borrowed scanner and my phone's flashlight, when I picked up a call that never made it to the news. No distress code, just static. And breathing. Tonight I'm sharing 20 true survivor stories from that storm. These are voices from the hill country real Texans who lived through rising water, collapsing roads, and something else they couldn't explain. Something that watched them from the floodwater. Something that moved when everything else stood still. These stories aren't stitched together from rumor. They're firsthand. And if you think a storm is just wind and rain, you haven't heard. What crawled out when the river rose? Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Drop it in the comments, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear might just change how you feel the next time you hear thunder in the distance. Let's begin. It had already been raining for 2 days when the sirens started going off across Brenham. Jeremy Barnes heard them through the wet hum of the storm, long and mournful like a dying horn. He looked out the window of his 2-story home on Cottonwood Lane and saw the neighbors packing their cars, yelling over the roar of water rushing through the gutters. The Brazos had overrun itself again, and this time it wasn't giving warnings, it was taking. Fast. Jeremy didn't leave. Not because he was brave, and not because he didn't believe the danger. He just couldn't make himself go. The house had been in his family for 3 generations. His granddad had built it with his own 2 hands. Every nail in the frame, every board in the floor, he'd hammered in himself. There was a photo of him in the hallway with a tool belt around his skinny waist and a Marlboro hanging from his mouth, grin wide as Texas. You don't walk away from that kind of legacy. Not unless you have to. Jeremy told his wife Emily and the kids to take the truck and go stay with her sister up in Tyler. They begged him not to stay behind, but he waved them off, like he always did when things got tough. He told them he'd meet them after the storm. He didn't mean to lie. By the time the sun set on the second day, the water had crawled across the yard, gulped the front porch, and begun to seep through the cracks in the floorboards. Jeremy sealed what he could. He pushed towels under the doors, used duct tape along the windows, moved the couch upstairs, unplugged the TV, turned off the main power breaker in the garage. He had an old lantern that gave off a faint yellow glow and a half-pack of smokes. He hadn't touched in 3 years. He lit one, sat by the window, and watched the water rise like it had a purpose. It was around midnight when he heard the first sound, not thunder. Not rain. It was ... sloshing. Not the kind that water makes when it laps against a wall or creeps across tile. This was heavy, deliberate, like something walking in it. A dragging step, then another, slow and wet. Jeremy turned off the lantern, held his breath, and leaned toward the stairwell that led to the lower level. He couldn't see anything, but he could feel it. The house, once warm and familiar, suddenly felt like a stranger. The air had shifted, cooled, thickened. He told himself it was just the storm playing tricks on his mind. Isolation, stress, old nerves flaring up. He went to bed in the upstairs guest room, tried to sleep. He might have dozed off. He wasn't sure. When he woke, the rain was still going, and the sound had moved. It was on the stairs now. Slosh step, slosh step. Jeremy crept out of bed and into the hallway, lantern in hand. The air smelled wrong, like copper and rot. He leaned, over the banister and looked down. That's when he saw the water. It had made it halfway up the staircase, muddy and thick and black as oil dot, and something was in it. He couldn't see it fully, not at first, just the outline, like a shadow under. Ice, long and narrow, moving just beneath the surface. It slid silently between the wooden banisters, brushed up against the stair rail, and disappeared under the steps. Jeremy froze. He didn't move for what felt like minutes. Then he ran back to the guest room, locked the door, and shoved the dresser in front of it. He sat there until dawn, listening. The rain stopped around 6 a.m., but the water didn't drain. It just sat there, still, heavy, waiting. He tried the radio. Dead. Cell phone. No service. He tried shouting out the window, but there was no one to hear him. The streets were flooded and empty. Trees bowed under the weight of soaked leaves. Power lines hung low like nooses. He thought he saw something move in the water again, but it vanished when he looked straight at it. That night, he heard the steps again, but this time they didn't stop on the stairs. They reached the landing. Sat frozen in the bed, heart slamming in his chest, as he heard the wet footsteps on the hardwood floor. Step, drag, step, drag, right. Outside his door, and then the knob turned, just slightly. Just enough to click, then silence. Jeremy didn't sleep that night. He watched the door, hand clutched around the metal base of the lantern, breath shallow. When morning came, the water had started to drain. Slowly, as if it were being sucked back into the ground by something reluctant to let go. By the afternoon, it was gone, but the house wasn't empty. Every mirror had fogged over despite no humidity or steam. The photos on the wall had warped. One of them, the one of his grandfather, had fallen to the floor, the glass shattered, the smile scratched out. The claw marks on the wall started at the base of the staircase and ended just outside the guest room. He left that day. Didn't lock up. Didn't say goodbye. He took nothing but the clothes on his back. When he made it to Tyler and told Emily what happened, she cried. But not because she didn't believe him, because she did. 2 weeks later, the house collapsed into its foundation. It sits abandoned now, half buried in wet earth. Sometimes people say they hear something moving in the flooded lot when it rains. Slosh, step, slosh, step. And sometimes, when you stand on the sidewalk too long, you'll feel water pooling around your feet, even on the driest day. It had rained for 6 days straight in Beaumont, the kind of relentless Texas storm that didn't just soak the ground but sank it. By the third day, the creek behind Millie Rourke's duplex had climbed out of its banks like a slow-moving animal. By the fifth, it had crept into her backyard, swallowed the porch, and soaked the first 3 stairs. On the 6th, the ground floor was a swamp. She should have evacuated, sure, but after 37 years of stubborn independence and 3 bad marriages, Millie didn't scare easily, especially not by weather. She had her lanterns, a small radio, and 2 shelves of dry goods. She moved upstairs when the water reached her calves, dragging up what she could: her old recliner, the radio, a box of photographs, and the Beretta she kept in her sewing cabinet. She'd been through hurricanes, blackouts, and break-ins. She figured she'd get through this one too. But by sundown that evening, the power had been gone for 2 days, the roads were impassable, and the water downstairs was almost to the doorknobs. Millie sat on the second-floor landing, watching the rising darkness out the window while the rain beat against the glass like it hated her. That's when she first heard the voice, a whisper at first, soft and low, almost like the house itself was sighing. She'd thought it was the water shifting or wind sneaking in through the gaps in the old siding. But then it came again, louder, From directly below her, beneath the floorboards of the hallway just behind where she sat, it said her name. Not loud, not shrill, just clear. Millie. She froze. For a second, she thought maybe she'd fallen asleep and dreamed it. She'd been tired. Her nerves were shot. She hadn't eaten much. But the second time was unmistakable. The voice was male, low and hoarse, like someone out of breath or drowning. Millie, down here. She stood up too fast and nearly tipped over. The flashlight beam wavered across the hallway, casting warped shadows from the picture frames, lining the walls. She stared down at the floorboards beneath her slippers, old pine boards weathered gray with age, nails blackened, wood warped in spots from past leaks. The voice had come from just underneath them. She didn't move for nearly 10 minutes. She listened, and the house listened back. Rain ticked on the rooftop like 1,000 claws. Her radio crackled with static from the corner. Then the voice came again. Help me. It sounded like it was right beneath the floor, just under the boards. Not in the flooded first level under it, in the crawl space. Except that couldn't be. The crawl space had flooded on day 4. She'd seen it from the back porch before the water got that high. Even if someone had somehow gotten under there, they'd be dead by now. But this voice didn't sound like it was dying. It sounded like it had been waiting. She backed away slowly until her heel hit the last step leading up to her bedroom. She climbed the rest in silence, locked the door behind her, and sat with the Beretta in her lap all night. At 3:17 a.m., the whispering started again. Louder this time. Not just one voice. 3. A woman's, sharp and wet-sounding, like gurgling through a broken throat. A child's faint, singing something she couldn't understand. And the man's again rasping, whispering her name like it tasted sweet. Millie. By dawn, she'd convinced herself it was the flood playing tricks. She'd heard stories, auditory hallucinations from stress, isolation. That had to be it. She barely slept, and when she did, she dreamed of water rising through the floor, of fingers reaching between the cracks in the wood. She used her flashlight to inspect the hallway again, careful not to step too hard. No loose boards. No signs of moisture on the second floor, even though the air smelled thick, like rot and old copper. The water below had risen enough that she could barely see the living room furniture anymore, just vague lumps bobbing like carcasses. But then she noticed something new. Her framed family photo at the end of the hallway had fallen off the wall face down. When she picked it up, the glass was cracked and the picture inside had changed. Her late husband, Frank, was missing from the shot. In his place was a dark smudge, a shape that hadn't been there before. A figure standing in the background, in the corner of the room behind them, tall, soaked, watching. That was the moment she felt the floor shift. A slight bend under her feet, as if something was pushing from underneath. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stepped back into her bedroom, shut the door, and locked it again. The next night, the whispering didn't stop. It went on for hours, crawling under the floor like rats made of words. They didn't just call her name now. They said things she hadn't heard in decades. Frank's voice, apologizing for the night he'd broken her collarbone. Her mother's voice, humming the lullaby she'd sung before drowning herself in 1979. Her son's voice, grown now, even though he died of pneumonia at age 6. By the third night, something knocked from below. Not from the downstairs level. Beneath her bed. She'd pulled the mattress off, heart thundering, shined her flashlight under it, and saw nothing but dusty floorboards. But when she stood back up, her knees trembling, she realized the closet door was ajar. She hadn't opened it in 2 days. Inside, hanging limp on the rod, was her late husband's coat. Still soaked, still dripping. She hadn't brought it upstairs. She hadn't touched it in years. The voices grew more demanding. She couldn't drown them out. She ripped the batteries from the radio, shoved cotton in her ears, but the sounds burrowed inside her skull. They told her to listen, to remember, to come downstairs. She didn't eat for 2 days, didn't sleep. Just sat in the recliner near the hallway and watched the boards. They pulsed now, just slightly, breathing. Her flashlight flickered every time she walked past the spot where the first voice had come. She hadn't prayed in years, but she found herself whispering desperate apologies to people who weren't alive anymore. On. The 6th night, the rain stopped. The sky cleared like nothing had ever happened. A rescue boat passed the neighborhood early that morning. A voice called through a megaphone, checking for survivors. Millie didn't answer. When they found her days later, the water had receded. The house reeked of mildew and death, and the second floor was untouched, except for the hole in the hallway. The boards had been pried open from beneath, not by tools, by fingers. 10 long, dark gouges were etched into the wood around the opening, as if something had clawed its way up through the sodden guts of the house. They never found Millie, not upstairs, not downstairs, but when a neighbor's dog got into the crawl space weeks later, it refused to come out. Just stood there, in the dark, tail tucked, growling at the floorboards above. Every time someone walks past that part of the hallway now, they say they hear something faint, wet, distant voices whispering just below their feet, calling out names. Sometimes the names are theirs. It had rained for 6 days straight, and by the 7th morning, most of Tyler, Texas looked less like a city and more like a drowned memory. The river had burst its banks, and with the water came all kinds of things: broken fences, twisted lawn chairs, floating propane tanks, even the bloated carcasses of deer and dogs. The wind didn't howl, it whispered, as if the storm was telling secrets through the sycamore trees. They bent low like mourners, their bare branches scratching at the sky. Bobby Lawton had stayed behind when most of his neighbors evacuated. He didn't like shelters, he didn't like people. Not anymore. Not since Janine had passed 2 years ago in the cancer ward out in Longview, her eyes glazed and her hands limp as he read her favorite psalms aloud just to hear himself speak. Since then, the house on Morgan Street had become more of a place he haunted than lived in. So when the waters came, he stayed put. He watched from the porch as the muddy water crept over his front steps, swallowing his mailbox, his garden, and finally the bottom half of his old Silverado. On the morning of the 7th day, with his power out and only 2 cans of beans left, Bobby saw something odd through the fog rising off the floodwaters. A canoe, an old wooden rescue model, the kind the fire department might have used 30 years ago, glided silently through the water right up to his porch. It made no splash, no ripples in the water behind it, just drifted like a whisper. On glass, Bobby stood there, soaked and blinking in disbelief. There was no one inside, no paddles, no ropes, just a moldy orange life jacket curled at the bow and a thin layer of black water pooled at the bottom. He called out, just to make sure, "Hello? Anybody out there?" His voice cracked. Nothing answered him. No motor hums, no birds, no frogs. Just that awful stillness. He could have let it go. Could have stayed on the porch and waited another day or two for rescue or death, whichever came first. But something in him, something he didn't quite understand, moved his legs forward. He stepped down into the water, which was up to his waist now, and climbed into the canoe. It rocked once, then steadied like it had been expecting him. Sat down and looked around for paddles again. Still nothing. The canoe started to move. At first he thought maybe it was the current. But there wasn't much of one. Everything around him floated dead still, like the flood had sucked the life out of time itself. The canoe wasn't drifting downstream toward the center of town. It was veering sideways toward the tree line. At the edge of the block where the woods started, back behind the houses. The places no rescue team would go. Where you taking me? Bobby asked, half laughing to keep the dread from his throat. You ghost-powered, or what? The canoe didn't answer, but it didn't need to. The water around it began to shiver in tiny ripples, like something underneath had stirred. Bobby leaned over the side and squinted down, but the water was dark and thick with runoff and leaves and oil and God knows what else. He saw nothing, but he felt. Watched out the trees grew closer. Cypress and pine, their roots submerged, their trunks half-eaten by the rising water. It should have been beautiful in that eerie, swampy kind of way. But there was a smell now, one he hadn't noticed before, like rot and wet metal. Like something buried long ago had been unearthed and didn't want to go back under. The canoe didn't slow. It glided between the trees, deeper into the flooded woods, turning smoothly without Bobby doing a thing. By now, he'd stopped questioning it. The air felt heavy, the silence thicker. He reached for the life jacket, more for comfort than safety, and found that it was damp and warm, like someone had been wearing it recently. Like someone had just stepped out. That's when he saw the first body. It was half submerged, caught in the fork of a waterlogged branch. Face down, bloated, its fingers curled like it had tried to hold on to something. It was wearing a fireman's uniform, the patch on the shoulder darkened but still readable. Tyler F.D. Bobby's breath caught. He turned around to look for help. For another canoe, for a sign. This wasn't what it felt like. The woods had swallowed the street behind him. He couldn't even see his house anymore. A soft creak echoed from beneath the canoe. Wood on wood, or maybe bone. He sat still, heart thudding. Another creak. Louder this time and accompanied by a subtle rocking motion. Something was underneath. The canoe didn't tip, but it began to move again. This time slower, more deliberate. Turning in a wide arc, navigating through tighter trees and over submerged fences and fences. Bobby ducked when a low branch grazed his shoulder, and that's when he saw the second body. This one hanging in the crook of a tree, its limbs tangled. In vines, its head lolling. A woman, blonde, maybe 30. Her mouth frozen mid-scream. Bobby screamed too then. Not loud, but sharp, guttural. He grabbed the sides of the canoe and yelled, "Let me out. I don't want to see no more." But the canoe didn't stop. The water thickened. It actually thickened. He could feel the resistance against the hull like molasses. His arms felt heavy, his breath ragged. The light dimmed. It wasn't sunset yet, but under the trees it felt like twilight. And there, dead ahead, was the old boathouse. He hadn't seen it in years. It belonged to some rich guy who built it, out back when the neighborhood was still new. Bobby remembered rumors from back then. A kid had gone missing. A church group had refused to kayak near it. The police never came out here much. He thought it had been torn down, but it stood tall. Now its wooden slats rotted and warped, the door half open and yawning like a jaw. The canoe moved toward it, straight and steady. "No," Bobby whispered. "I'm not going in there." But he did. The canoe glided through the open door and into the dark. Inside, it was dry. The water just ended. The bottom of the boathouse was exposed, cracked and dry like it hadn't been touched in years. The canoe thudded softly onto the floorboards. He stepped out, breath fogging in the sudden cold. The light barely reached inside, but he could see shapes on the wall scratches, deep and erratic, as if someone had clawed their way around the inside. Chains dangled from the rafters, and a smell hit him so hard he gagged sweet rot like fruit left to die in the sun. Then something whispered. It came from the far end of the boathouse. Not a voice, not really. Just breath, in and out, in and out. Like someone trying to remember how to be alive. He backed away, but the door slammed shut. He spun. The canoe was gone, vanished. Just dry floor? The whispering grew louder. Then the floor buckled beneath him. He fell through rotten wood and into something wet, not water. It was thicker, mucus and filth. He struggled, his arms tangled in something coarse. Hair, human hair. A light blinked on. Not his. A lantern hung from a nail above him, its glow pale and sickly. In its light, he saw what he was in. Bodies, piled, packed, all staring up. All with mouths open, screaming. And they were all him. Dozens of Bobby Lawtons, same face, same eyes. All dead, all decaying. The whispering was now inside his head. You never left. You never stayed. You drowned long ago. You are one of us now. He screamed until his throat bled. And somewhere, back in Tyler, a canoe floated up to another porch. Empty. Waiting. It had been raining for 3 days straight. Not just a regular Texas downpour that lasted a couple of hours before the heat swallowed the moisture again, but something deeper, angrier, older. People in the outskirts of Austin started saying the land was tired of being built on, that the rivers were rising to remind everyone they weren't just features of the landscape, but things that breathed and remembered. All I knew was that I hadn't seen my dog since yesterday, and the street in front of my house looked more like the Colorado River than anything I'd ever recognized from my bedroom window. I was 16. Too young to know better, too old to stay put. My mom had gone to stay with my aunt in Dripping Springs before the main highway shut down. I told her I'd wait for her friend Ken to pick me up after work. Ken never showed. Maybe he got stuck somewhere. Maybe he didn't care. Either way, by dusk on the second night, I was alone in the house, watching the water crawl up the driveway, licking the tires of the old F-150 that hadn't run in 2 years. The power had gone out around 3 p.m. My phone was at 9% and barely got any signal. I'd been pacing from window to window for hours, watching the rain like it owed me an explanation. I kept thinking I heard things splashing, distant humming, once even what sounded like laughing. But the moment I opened the window, it stopped. Just wind and water and that terrible smell floods always bring earth. Mold, decay. That night, around 11, I grabbed my dad's old flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The water was shin-deep now, brown and sluggish, winding between the trees like it had somewhere to be. I called for Toby my mutt. He'd slipped out the back fence when the storm started. I'd spent all day hoping he'd come sloshing back through the yard, tail wagging, tongue lolling. But he hadn't, and with each passing hour something in my gut twisted tighter. I waded into the water. Not far, just a few feet past the porch, where the mailbox used to be visible. Now only the metal top poked through the flood like a warning. I played the flashlight across the current, half expecting to see a bloated carcass or a floating tree limb. Instead, I saw movement, something below the surface, dark against dark, yet shifting just enough to catch the light. I blinked and leaned in closer, probably a log. Maybe even a fish. Big one catfish the size of my thigh weren't unheard of out here. But it moved again. Not just drifted, moved. Against the current. Toward me. My breath hitched. The beam of the flashlight flickered. A dying heartbeat in my hand. I slapped it, cussed, got it back steady. The shape beneath the surface paused, and then it rose. It didn't break the water like a swimmer might. No splash, no ripple. Just surfaced. And then it looked at me. At first, I thought it was a man. Pale, long-limbed, with hair floating around its face like dead seaweed. But its eyes, Jesus, its eyes weren't right. No whites, just black, like wet stone. And they didn't blink, didn't waver. They locked on me, and I swear I felt something shift behind my ribs, like my lungs forgot what they were supposed to do. I stepped back. My foot slipped on something underwater, a rock, or maybe the remains of a flower bed. I fell hard, the flashlight splashing out of my grip, rolling away into the current like it couldn't get away fast enough. That thing in the water didn't move, but I knew it wanted to. I knew it was waiting, testing, watching to see what I'd do next. I crawled backward until I felt the porch steps under my hands. My legs were trembling, soaked through, and my skin itched like ants were crawling just beneath the surface. I got back into the house and slammed the door. Locked it, like that would matter. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning the water was higher, waist deep outside. The sky was the color of rotting cotton. I stayed inside, flashlight gone, phone dead, no power, no signal. Around 2 p.m., I heard something scratching at the back door, real slow, like fingernails. I didn't go. Looked out by sunset, the scratching stopped. I don't know how many days passed. I lost count. The food ran out fast. The air inside the house was thick, wet, sour. I kept seeing things out the window. Ripples where there shouldn't be any. Shadows that didn't follow the clouds, and at night, the whispering started, not voices I could understand, not words. Just noise, low and slithering, like someone whispering underwater. I pressed my hands to my ears and still heard it. I buried myself under blankets, the way I did when I was a kid scared of the dark, but now I was scared of something real. Something wet and patient. Then the dream started. I dreamed I was underwater, but I wasn't drowning. I was breathing somehow. Surrounded by old buildings, broken cars, and things that looked like people but weren't. Their limbs were wrong. Too long, too thin, too still, and they watched me. The same way that thing in the water had, not with curiosity, with expectation. When I woke up, my pillow was soaked and not from sweat. The taste in my mouth was brackish. The windows were fogged from the inside. My skin felt loose. I don't remember leaving the house, but one morning I found myself standing, knee-deep in water at the bottom of the porch steps, staring into the current again. No flashlight this time, just dawn light and silence. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe I thought Toby was still out there. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe I just broke, but I looked into the water again, and it looked back. Not one thing this time. Many. Dozens. Faces under the surface. Some like the one I'd seen. Some different. Children. Old men. Women with their mouths open too wide. Some I recognized. Mr. Langley from 2 houses down. The mail lady. Even Ken, though his face was twisted like it had been stretched too far. Were all looking up at me. And then I felt it, this pull. Not physical. Not like hands grabbing me. Deeper than that. Like something inside me leaned forward without my permission. Like I belonged to the water now. Like I'd looked too long, and the looking itself was the invitation. I screamed. I don't remember doing it, but my throat hurt for days after. I turned and ran, back into the house. Barricaded the doors with whatever furniture I could shove. I didn't care about food or power anymore. I just needed walls between me and the flood. A rescue boat came 3 days later. They said they'd been circling the neighborhood for a week, but the water kept making them turn back. That they hadn't seen any sign of my house until that morning. I didn't argue. I didn't tell them what I'd seen. I just got in the boat, stared at the floor, and didn't look into the water. Not once. I live with my mom now in San Angelo. No rivers nearby, just dry dirt and ugly mesquite trees. I stay inside when it rains. I keep every light on. I don't take baths. And I don't talk about what happened. But sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear it, that whispering. That soft, wet murmur under the bed or behind the walls. And I know it's not done with me, because the thing no one tells you is this. Once you've looked into the water and it's looked into you, it doesn't matter if you leave Dot, it knows your face, it knows your name, and it waits. It started raining sometime after midnight, one of those slow, lazy Texas storms that creep in from the west and hang low over the hill country like a brooding thought you can't shake. The air had smelled wrong since sundown wet earth and ozone mixed with something faintly sour like spoiled meat left in the back of a truck. The dogs down the road had started whining hours before a single drop hit the porch tin. Ours, a 6-year-old shepherd mix named Buck, started acting strange right around then too. He was usually calm, loyal to a fault, and not one for theatrics. We'd adopted him from a local rescue outside of Kerrville. He'd been found tied up to a mesquite tree during the hottest stretch of August with no water and a gash across his ribs that never fully grew back fur. He was a survivor. That dog feared nothing, snakes, thunder, fireworks, nothing. But something in the water that night rattled him bad. The creek that cut behind our property, Nolan Creek, had been dry all summer. You could stand in its bed and not get your boots muddy. But that week, it had started to rise again, like it was waking up. It crept higher every day, slipping over the rocks and brushing against the tufts of Johnson grass. By Friday, it had swallowed the lower pasture, and on Saturday, the ground turned to mush all the way up to the chicken coops. That night, the rain came heavy. Not a downpour, not all at once. Just relentless like someone squeezing a soaked sponge across the sky. And Buck wouldn't come inside, not even for jerky. Not even when Dad whistled that two-tone call Buck always responded to. He stood at the edge of the porch, ears pricked, tail stiff, and stared into the dark, barking over and over. Not loud, not wild. Just steady, measured. As if trying to hold something back. At first, we thought maybe it was an armadillo in the yard again or a coyote slinking too close to the coop. But Buck wasn't barking at the grass or the brush. He was facing the water. And whatever he saw, it held him frozen there like a statue. The power flickered out around 2 a.m. I remember the hum of the fridge dying and the lights going dark, except for the battery lamp Mom kept in the hallway closet. We huddled in the living room, listening to the rain on the roof and Buck's barks out on the porch. The windows were fogged, but you could still make out the silhouette of him through the glass, staring at that black water like it owed him something. Then, the barking stopped. It didn't trail off. It didn't turn to a growl or a yelp. It just cut out mid-bark like someone hit mute on a remote. And I swear, in that silence, we heard the sound of the water moving, lapping against the wooden steps, slapping against the side of the porch, but it was wrong. Water doesn't move like that. It doesn't sound hungry. Dad got up first and opened the door. He didn't even step out, just swung it open wide. The storm wind hit us, cold and thick with the smell of wet soil. And the porch was empty. No Buck. No sign of struggle. No tufts of fur. No splash. Just gone. We called for him until sunrise, even went out with flashlights once the rain slowed. We walked the yard, the creek line, the fields out back. Nothing. The water had pulled back some, but the yard was soggy and uneven, as if something had churned it with big hands underneath. The only thing we found was Buck's collar. It was sitting on the first step of the porch, dry and clean, like someone had gently taken it off and set it there. Didn't say much that day. He stood at the edge of the porch, hands in his pockets, staring at the spot where Buck had been. Later, he said he thought he saw something out in the creek just before the barking stopped, something standing tall in the water, taller than a man, with arms too long and no face to speak of. But he didn't say it like he believed it. He said it like it was a dream he hadn't woken up from yet. 2 nights later, we heard the barking again, but Buck was gone. We all knew that. Still, at 3:14 a.m., sharp as a clock chime, his bark echoed from the edge of the water. Not a recording, not something that sounded like him. It was him. We all heard it. Mom cried. Dad swore under his breath and wouldn't look out the window. But I did. And I saw him. He was standing right where the yard dipped toward the creek, just barely visible in the moonlight. Buck, or something wearing his shape. Same stance, same stiff tail, same shadow. But his eyes weren't right. They glowed too steady, like twin headlights in fog. He wasn't barking anymore, just standing there, watching, waiting. I opened the door, don't ask me why, and took one step onto the porch. Just one. The air changed instantly. It was heavier, colder, and somehow thicker. The water lapped at the grass like it was breathing in and out. Then Buck, or whatever that thing was, turned and walked into the creek. Not swam. Walked. The water swallowed him slowly, and just before it covered his tail, I swear I saw a hand reach up from the water and wrap around his hind leg. Thin, pale, almost human, but not quite. We moved a week later. Dad called in a favor with a friend in San Angelo and took a new job hauling feed. We packed light. We left behind the chicken coops, the barn, the tool shed. And we didn't say goodbye to the neighbors. No one asked why. They'd seen things too. That creek doesn't show up on every map. Some locals call it Nolan Creek. Some say it's part of the old Spanish watershed system. But others, mostly the older folks who don't talk much, say it's older than that. Older than the town. Older than the people. They say it runs deep, beneath the hill country, and comes up where it pleases, dragging things with it when it rises. Sometimes it brings bones. Sometimes it takes pets. Sometimes more. Years later, I went back once. Just for an hour. I parked down the road and walked the fence line to where the porch used to be. It had collapsed. The steps were rotted out. But the grass around the edge was still oddly trimmed, like something passed through there often. And in the distance, down where the creek still ran dark and slow, I saw a shape. Four-legged, motionless. It didn't bark. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching, and the water behind it rippled like something underneath was breathing slow and steady. Waiting for someone else to come too close. It had been raining in Lufkin for 5 days straight when the power went out. Not a flicker, not a warning, just gone, like someone had pulled the plug on the entire world. I was holed up in my sister's old place, a 2-story house off the loop, just south of the paper mill. She'd moved out to Houston last fall, and I'd come back from the Cogdutches after getting laid off, thinking I could use a few weeks to figure my life out. Never imagined I'd be figuring it out while stranded on the second floor of a flooding house, eating cold beans out of a can and listening to the water rise like it had a grudge. It started with the drains, gurgling downstairs. I was on the couch, watching the radar on my phone when I heard it, like something was choking in the pipes. Then the toilets coughed. An hour later, the first floor was under 4 inches of water. By the next morning, it was waist deep and creeping up the staircase, thick with the stink of earth and mildew, like the entire ground had been turned inside out. I barricaded myself upstairs, brought up food, water, a flashlight, my dead phone, and a kitchen knife. I don't know what the knife was for. Maybe comfort. Maybe just to feel like I had some control. There was no cell service and no way out. Roads were rivers. News reports said people in low-lying areas were evacuating, but nobody was coming down my road. It felt like the world had stopped just outside the fogged-up windows. That second night, something changed. The storm let up, not all the way, but enough that the wind didn't howl anymore. The rain came steady and soft. The kind of rain that makes you think everything's settling down. That's when I first heard the knocking. It was faint, just under. The sound of the rain. A light tapping, not at the front door or the back door, but at the window. The one above the backyard second story, a good 10 feet off the ground. I thought maybe it was a branch blown up in the storm, but the tree out back had been cut down years ago. I got up, flashlight in hand, and crept toward the window. She was there, floating, a little girl, maybe 8, 9 years old, her long black hair clung to her soaked face, and her dress, what was left of it, looked like something from another time. Something you'd see in a black and white photo hanging in your grandmother's hallway. She wasn't standing on anything, just hanging there in the air, water dripping off her toes, her arms straight at her sides like she was waiting for something, or someone. She looked right at me and smiled, not wide, not cartoonish, just a small, knowing smile. Her eyes were pitch black. I stumbled back, dropped the flashlight. By the time I found it and swung the beam back to the window, she was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside had me clutching the kitchen knife like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. I kept thinking, I must have been hallucinating. Stress, starvation, isolation, all the ingredients. But it didn't feel like a dream. It felt cold and sharp and real. Too real. Next morning, I tried to shake it off. Told myself I'd imagined her. But then I found the footprints. Wet, small, bare footprints. Not on the windowsill. On the upstairs carpet. Leading from the window toward the hallway, vanishing halfway down like she'd just stopped existing mid-step. I crouched beside them, touched the damp fabric. Still wet, still real. I felt a coldness creep up my back like ice water, and I knew. Then that whatever she was, she'd been inside. I thought about leaving, wading out through the water, but when I opened the door to the stairs, the water was halfway up the flight. Brown, swirling, full of things I didn't want to think about, broken chairs, floating debris, maybe worse. I shut the door and locked it. Not sure why. Not like a door would keep something like her out. That night, she came back. Same window. Same gentle knock. I didn't go to it. I stayed curled up against the far wall, flashlight off, holding my breath. But she didn't go away. She kept knocking. Softly, persistently. For hours. And then she spoke. Her voice was soft like a child, talking to a favorite pet. Let me in. I didn't answer. Please, I'm cold. Still, I said nothing. My throat was tight, my heart pounding so loud I thought she might hear it. I used to live here, she whispered. Didn't you know that? I didn't. I drowned here, she said. Right below you, in the dark. I covered my ears, rocked back and forth like a lunatic. I would have screamed if I thought it would make her stop, but she just kept knocking. And then, silence. I opened my eyes. Morning. The sun had finally risen, gray and weak, but real. I ran to the window. Nothing. No girl. No water on the sill. No footprints this time. I tried the radio that day. Just static. Still no cell service. No neighbors. The street was a lake. Houses half sunk. No movement. It felt like I was the last person on earth. That evening, the air in the house changed. Heavy. Like the pressure dropped all at once. It got hard to breathe. The kind of thick electric air you feel before a tornado. I stood at the top of the stairs, door shut tight, knife in one hand. That's when I heard the splashing from below, like something big moving through the water, furniture bumping against walls. Sloshing, breathing. I backed away from the door, sat down with my back to the wall, waited. The doorknob jiggled, softly. At first, then more urgently. Like a child trying to come in from the rain, I stood up, heart in my throat. Then the voice again right on the other side of the door. Let me in. This time it wasn't soft. It was cold, hollow, like wind howling through a well. "I know you saw me," she hissed. "You looked right at me. I saw you see me. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. The knob stopped turning. And then—" She laughed. It wasn't a child's laugh. It was the kind of sound that doesn't belong in a house. Low, rattling. Ancient. I passed out sometime that night. When I woke up, it was daylight and everything was still quiet, like the storm had never happened. When the rescue boat came 2 days later, I barely recognized the world outside. Mud-coated trees, empty houses, a landscape gutted by water. I didn't tell them about her. What would I say? A dead girl floated outside my second story window and tried to come in. They'd think the storm had gotten to me. But here's the thing. Last week, a woman from the county office came by. Said they were updating flood insurance claims and historical property records. She asked if I knew anything about the girl who drowned there back in 1981. I told her no. She said her name was Lacey Ward, 8 years old. Slipped into the creek behind the house during a flash flood. Body wasn't found for a week. When they pulled her out, her arms were at her sides, eyes open, and she was smiling. They buried her in the Lufkin Cemetery. But some nights, especially when it rains, I still hear the knocking. And I don't think she's finished waiting. The first thing Richard noticed when the floodwaters rose wasn't the water itself, it was the silence. The kind of silence that settled over a place when everything living had either left or gone still. No birds, no traffic, not even the wind in the pecan trees behind his duplex on Wonderworld Drive. Just that heavy, wet hush that seemed to press in from all sides, broken only by the steady, creeping gurgle of water finding its way into every crack of his home. He stayed because he didn't have anywhere else to go. His sister was up in Lubbock and barely spoke to him. His ex-wife would have laughed at the idea of sheltering him. The neighbors on either side had packed up and gone. 2 days ago, ever since the warnings came through that the San Marcos River might crest over. Richard had food, a flashlight, candles, and a battered .22 he hadn't fired in years. He told himself it'd be fine. Just a few inches, maybe a foot, tops. By the third night, the water had reached the top of the first step. Richard moved everything. He could upstairs his clothes, food, mattress, and a radio that mostly fizzed with static. He still went down during the day to check things, unplug appliances, turn breakers off, and make sure his old dog Bart hadn't left anything behind. Before he died last summer. It was strange how much he still looked for Bart's shape in the dark. Still half expected the click of nails on the tile. It was sometime after midnight when the knocking started. He'd been half asleep on the mattress on the floor. A small camping lantern glowing orange beside him. Rain ticked against the upstairs window like fingernails. Then came the sound, a rhythmic, dull knock. Not fast, not loud, just ... consistent. 3 knocks, then a pause. Then again, he sat up, listening. Thought maybe it was a branch against the siding. But the sound wasn't from outside. It had a hollow, almost subterranean echo to it, like something tapping wood from below. He stood, the lantern casting long shadows across the bare walls, and tiptoed to the staircase. The water was halfway up now, a few inches below the third step. Dark and still, with bits of floating debris swirling like dead leaves. He stood there for a long moment, waiting, listening. 3 more knocks. This time he was sure they came from the bathroom. His feet hit the wet step and the cold soaked into his socks instantly. He cursed and grabbed the flashlight, waded slowly through the water. The air was thick with mildew and that sour smell of wet drywall and rotting wood. As he moved down the narrow hallway toward the bathroom, the knocking returned, louder now, with just a little more insistence. like someone trapped under the floorboards. Except there weren't any floorboards in the bathroom, just old tile. And then, just before he opened the bathroom door, it stopped. Richard stood there with his hand on the knob. His breath was shallow, his heart too fast. He told himself it had to be the pipes. Maybe something shifting as the water rose, but the knock hadn't sounded like pipes. It had sounded like knuckles. He opened the door slowly. The water was nearly 2 feet high in the bathroom. The toilet looked like it might float off its base. The shower curtain drifted like a veil, half submerged, and the only sound was the faint drip from the faucet that hadn't worked since the flood began. The tub sat against the far wall, an old porcelain clawfoot number that was there when he moved in, stained brown around the drain, and missing its enamel in patches. He waded in, flashlight beams slicing through the murk. That smell was worse in here, like something rotting, the kind of decay that had heaped behind it. And then, just as he reached the edge of the tub, it happened again. Knocked out from the drain. He stepped back, nearly slipping. The sound had come from inside the tub, not the side, not beneath the floor, but up through the drain itself. Like something down in the pipes? Tapping to get out, he waited, staring at the rust-ringed hole. Nothing. Just water sloshing around his knees and his own breathing. The knock came again, but softer now. Almost timid. Almost patient. He backed out of the room, shut the door, and didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, the water had crept up another 2 steps. Richard didn't go downstairs at all that day. He kept the lantern close, kept the radio on even though it just spat static, and stared out the window at the gray sky hanging low over San Marcos. No power, no cell signal, no rescue boats. He hadn't seen a soul in 2 days. That night, the knocking came again. It started at midnight like before. 3 knocks. Always 3, then a pause. Then 3 more, louder this time. The tub again, he could tell. The sound had found its rhythm. It was like whatever was down there had patience. It would knock as long as it took. Richard tried to ignore it. He turned up the radio, stuffed his ears with cotton. But even through the muffled static, the knocking found him. Knock, knock, knock. Like it was in his head. Like it was inside the walls. At some point near dawn, it stopped. He thought that was the end of it. He hoped it was. It wasn't. The 3rd night, the knocking came earlier. It started around 9:30, and it didn't stop after 3. It went on for hours. Knock after knock, some fast, some slow, some scraping now like nails across metal. He heard the drain gurgle once, a wet choking sound. He thought he smelled something awful seep up through the vents, like old meat left out in the sun, and then it spoke. He was sure of it. A low, wet whisper, just beneath the knocking, bubbling up from under the tub. His name, Richard. He bolted upright, eyes wide in the dark. Richard. It was a child's voice. Not sweet. Not innocent. Off, like something trying to sound. Human, but not quite pulling it off. And worse, it didn't come just once. It repeated again and again, each time a little louder. Richard. Come down, Richard. I'm waiting. By now the water was nearly to the landing. He watched it ripple up the steps like it had a will of its own. Something brushed his bare foot that night. Cold, slimy. He didn't see what it was. On. The 4th night, he blocked the bathroom door with the old dresser from his bedroom. Piled heavy books against it. That night the knocking didn't just come from the tub. It came from the walls, from the vents, from beneath the stairs, and it never stopped. He didn't sleep. Just sat in the corner with his rifle in his lap, the flashlight shaking in his hand. The radio finally went dead around 3 a.m. The voice came louder now. You left me down there. Why didn't you pull me out? You let me drown. He didn't understand what it meant. He hadn't let anyone drown. He hadn't touched the water except to move things. He'd been alone the whole time, hadn't he? On the 5th night, the dresser was pushed over. He found it sideways in the hall, heavy books scattered in the water. The bathroom door wide open. Tub empty, but the drain was no longer clogged. It was clean now, wide open. Like it had been scrubbed by something ... eager ... There were wet handprints on the tile. Small ones, child-sized. He moved to the window, ready to scream, to wave for help, to do anything. But San Marcos was drowned and still, and the water had reached the top of the stairs. He stayed by the window all morning. When the sun came up, the flood shimmered silver and quiet. But Richard didn't look at it long, because in the reflection of the glass just behind him, he saw something small and dripping crawl out of the bathroom and slither up the wall. By the 6th night, Richard stopped moving. He sat cross-legged on the mattress, flashlight dead, rifle out of reach. The water was inches below him now, and from somewhere below, the knocking had returned. Soft, rhythmic. Patient. We bought the place in late June, not long after the floodwaters had finally pulled back from Victoria. The town was still piecing itself together when we arrived. Sandbags piled on sidewalks like sleeping animals, warped wooden boards stacked in front yards, and the stench of river mud still lingering like an uninvited guest. We'd gotten a good deal on the house, which should have been our first warning. Anything that cheap in that part of Texas, post-flood, had to be holding something back. It was a one-story ranch style on a quiet cul-de-sac near Lone Tree Creek, a few blocks from where the water had rushed up past its banks and swallowed half the neighborhood. The seller, a wiry older man who wouldn't make eye contact, told us the house had minor water intrusion and had already been cleaned and dried by professionals. We signed the paperwork and moved in with our daughter, Alyssa, thinking we'd finally escaped Houston's chaos. It was supposed to be a fresh start, quiet, clean, simple. The first few days were uneventful. We scrubbed mildew from the walls, pulled up the soggy carpet in the den, and replaced the warped baseboards. There were spots in the house that still felt damp even when the sun was out and the AC was blasting, especially in the kitchen. We chalked it up to poor insulation and let it go. The well water system had survived the flood, but I didn't trust it. Not at first. So I had a local plumber named Rick come out to take a look. Friendly guy, big forearms, smelled like sawdust and chewing tobacco. He checked the filters, the pressure tank, even the crawl space where the pump line connected to. The house gave me a thumbs up and said, "She's solid." Could use a fresh filter though. I bought a new one at Home Depot the next day. The kind that looked like a tall white candle, meant to last 6 months. 2 weeks after moving in, my wife Julia called me over to the sink one afternoon. She was holding a tall glass of water up to the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. Her face looked off confused, slightly disgusted. I looked into the glass. The water was mostly clear, but there were small specks swirling at the bottom like grit or sand. I told her it was probably just air bubbles or sediment from the new filter settling in. I ran the tap for a minute, watched it clear up, and we forgot about it, but the specks kept coming back. Some days, the water smelled like metal. Other days, it tasted chalky, like drinking from an old hose. One morning, Julia spit hers into the sink and gagged. "Something's in it," she said. "It's not right." I figured maybe the filter had cracked, or the seal was bad, so I pulled the housing apart and took the cartridge out. It was dark brown, slimy, clogged with something I couldn't identify. I threw it out and replaced it. That's when it started getting worse. Alyssa began waking up at night crying, saying the water sounded wrong. When I asked what she meant, She just pointed toward the bathroom and whispered, "It talks. It says teeth words." She was 5, imaginative, sensitive to the move, so we brushed it off as stress. But she stopped drinking from the sink, even in the middle of a hot Texas night. She'd rather go thirsty than sip what came out of the faucet. I thought maybe it was my mind playing tricks, but I started hearing things too. Faint clicks and scrapes in the pipes. Once, at 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like something clinking against porcelain deep in the walls behind the shower. I pressed my ear to the tile and heard a soft rattle like something hard and small tumbling slowly downstream. I didn't tell Julia. It all came to a head the day the water pressure dropped to a trickle. I went into the utility room, pulled off the filter housing again, and this time the cartridge was shredded, ripped like something had clawed through it from the inside. I dumped the housing onto the concrete floor, expecting clumps of dirt and rust. What came out were teeth, human teeth. Not just fragments or chips full molars, some with roots, some with fillings. 14 of them, maybe more. Wet and glistening, and clinking as they bounced and rolled. I stared at them for a long time before calling Julia. She didn't believe me at first. She thought it was a prank. I made her come look. Her face drained of color the second she saw them. We called the sheriff's department. A young deputy came out with a clipboard and a heavy flashlight. He poked through the teeth with the tip of a pen like they were shells at the beach. Sighed. They'd have someone from the lab take a look. We never heard back from them. A few days later, Rick the plumber came back to inspect the well and the pipes. He brought another guy with him, older, heavier, chain-smoked the whole time. They drained the pressure tank, ran cameras through the main lines, checked the pump casing. Rick went silent halfway through the inspection. Just kept staring into the little screen on his camera monitor, not blinking. His partner asked what he was seeing. Rick didn't answer. When I asked what was wrong, he finally looked up and said, "You got something down there." I asked him to explain. He didn't. They left in a hurry, told me they'd be back with equipment. They never came back. I called them 4 times that week, left voicemails. No answer. I saw their van parked outside a bar on Loop 463 a few nights later and almost walked in, but something made me stop. A feeling like a hand closing around the back of my neck. The water stopped altogether not long after that. I tried switching to bottled for a while, but even that started to taste ... wrong. Sour, like it had soaked through bones. We moved Alyssa into my sister's place in Houston while we sorted it out. The day after she left, I walked into the bathroom and found the mirror completely fogged up. No one had used the shower. No one had turned on the sink. But the mirror was wet, and there were small red smudges around the drain. When I knelt down to look closer, I saw something jammed in the trap, something smooth and white. Another tooth, called a water specialist from San Antonio. This one didn't even come inside. Said if the source had been compromised during the flood, there was no telling what might be down there. Sometimes animals crawl into the system, he offered. Sometimes worse. He didn't elaborate. I didn't ask that night. I turned the faucet one last time. A low groan echoed through the pipes, like the house was in pain. Then came the gurgling. Thick, slow, syrupy. The water that finally dripped out was dark. Not red exactly, but something close, something that shimmered under the kitchen light like oil. That's when I saw the movement. Not in the sink, but in the reflection of the window behind it. A shape. Barely visible, hunched and slick, with shoulders that didn't move right. It was watching me through the glass. Even though I was sure the yard behind the house was empty. We sold the house 2 weeks later. Took a loss, no inspection, no disclosures. Sometimes I still get mail from the new owners, junk flyers, leftover insurance letters. I never opened them. I imagine they found the teeth too. Or maybe they found more than teeth. Maybe they found what was making them. Maybe it's still drinking the water. The storm hit Galveston just after midnight. One of those brooding, unpredictable Gulf tempests that seem to rise out of nothing, all quiet and distant until they're suddenly at your door like a drunk uncle with a grudge. The wind snapped. Power lines like shoelaces, trees bowed and broke, and whole streets turned into fast-running streams before folks even realized their crawl spaces were gone. Power outages spread block by block, one neighborhood after another going dark. Ours was no exception until you got to the intersection of Winchell and Laramie. That's where the streetlight stood, a tall, rusted old lamppost from maybe the 50s, still wearing the pitted scars of past hurricanes and salt-heavy winds. It stood half submerged in water when I first noticed it, glowing this eerie, unnatural blue. Not white. Not yellow like you'd expect. Blue, cold and soft, but steady, it hummed too. Low and deep, like the bass note of a pipe organ, and you didn't so much hear it as feel it settle into your ribs. I chalked it up to weird wiring, some buried generator, maybe even a city system glitch. You come up with explanations when the power's out everywhere else, and yet this one goddamn light glows like the eye of Sauron. But then I saw the line, its only connection to the grid dangling in the water, snapped clean. That's when it stopped being explainable. I was staying in my late uncle's house at the time. He passed last year and left me the keys to that leaning clapboard thing with the black mold along the baseboards and a crawl space that always smelled like cat piss, even though he never owned a cat. He used to ramble about things under the house, muttering through whiskey breath about the watchers, and the bone taps when he'd get deep in his cups. I thought it was dementia or just old man blues. But the first time I saw the light from his porch, I felt something move in my stomach, a clench. Like nausea and dread shook hands. It didn't blink, not even in the worst of the wind. Every other light, every house, every car in our zip code went dark. But not that one. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the window like a kid waiting for Santa, just watching it. I swore it got a little brighter every hour. My neighbor, Mrs. Cantwell, came outside just after 3 a.m., standing barefoot in the water like it wasn't 40 degrees and rising. She was staring at the light, too. Her nightgown was clinging to her frame, soaked up to her thighs, and she was mouthing something. Not speaking, mouthing. I opened the door and called to her, but she didn't flinch. She just turned around and walked straight back into her house like nothing happened. She died the next day. Heart attack, they said. Her body was found half out of bed, one arm extended like she'd been reaching for something. That wasn't the end of it. The next night, I saw kids playing near it. Real young ones, 5, maybe 6. Way too young to be out there alone during a power outage with water still lapping over the curbs. They weren't local. I'd never seen them before, and I know everyone on this street. Their clothes looked strange, too dated, like old photos of Depression-era kids, right down to the short pants and buttoned vests. One of them kept pointing up at the light and giggling, and that low hum, it got louder when he laughed. The water around the pole shimmered like something was moving under it. Not rippling from wind, moving, circular, like it was breathing. I went out there with a flashlight just to make sure it wasn't some weird hallucination. I'm not proud to admit it, but I took a kitchen knife too. You grow up in Texas, you learn not to investigate strange noises without a little steel. But by the time I reached the edge of the flooded street, the kids were gone. No footprints, no ripples, no laughter. Just the light, and that humming. It grew louder the closer I got, but not in the way sound usually works. It felt like the hum was behind my eyes, blooming in my skull like heat stroke. I looked up at the lamp and saw something inside it. At first, I thought it was a bird, some poor thing trapped behind the glass. But it didn't move like a bird. It didn't move at all. It just pressed against the inside, slow and deliberate, like something trying to remember how to get out. It had shape but no definition, like mist forming a face before the wind ruins it. I stood there frozen for a long time until I felt the water around my ankles drop suddenly cold, like ice water had spilled into the flood. That's when I heard my name. It didn't come from a house. It didn't come from behind me. It came from above, from the lamp. I bolted. Didn't look back. Locked the door behind me and unplugged every damn thing in the house. Slept with the knife under my pillow like a fool. The city came out the next morning. They sent utility workers to check the line. I watched from behind the blinds like some paranoid shut-in. 2 of them approached the light pole, splashing through the street with their gear, talking casually. The moment they got within 15 feet of the base, both of them stopped moving. Just froze. One raised his hand slowly and pointed up at the lamp, and the other dropped his tools right there in the water and turned to leave. No conversation, no gestures. Just turned and walked. The first guy stayed a little longer, maybe a minute. Then, he turned too. The next day, city records said the issue had been resolved, but the light was still on. A week passed. Then too, I stopped sleeping. I started hearing the hum even inside the house, especially at night, especially when I stood near any drain or pipe. One morning, I found footprints in the crawl space, mud barefoot, child-sized. They led to the base of the support pillar directly beneath my bedroom, circled it 3 times, and stopped. I tried telling people, posted about it online. Nobody believed me. My post on a local forum was deleted. The city refused to answer my emails. My cousin came to stay one weekend and joked about it, calling it my spook light. He left at 2 a.m. without a word, just packed and drove off. Later, he texted me one sentence, "There's something inside it. I moved out last month. Can't tell you where I went. Doesn't matter. The house is empty now. The streetlight still burns blue. Someone told me it's humming louder these days. They said 2 kids went missing during the last heavy rain, and their bikes were found leaning against the pole, tires half submerged, still spinning. But the part that keeps me up, the part that makes me break into sweats even in broad daylight, is this. I drove by last week just to see. From 2 blocks away, I saw that cold blue glow and felt that bone-deep vibration. Again. But when I raised my binoculars just for a second, I swear to God I saw my uncle's face inside the glass. Eyes wide, mouth open, like he was still screaming to get out, or worse ... like he wanted me to come back. The water didn't rise like it usually did. It didn't come with the hard slap of rain on tin roofs and the smell of earth being churned up from the creek beds behind the woods. It came quietly, like something sneaking into your room at night. 1 minute, the wind was blowing leaves in lazy circles down Oak Hollow Road, and the next, the bayou had swallowed most of La Grange Hole. You don't expect that. Not here. Not in the middle of a warm spring morning with kids still out on bikes and screen doors left open for the breeze. I'd been gone 2 days. Left early Thursday for a quick job down in Port Aransas. Some wiring thing in a dockhouse that couldn't wait, according to the owner. I remember calling Cassie right after I hit I-10. Told her I'd be back by Saturday night, and not to let the chickens out before 7 because that damn raccoon was still poking around the coop. She laughed, said she had it handled, and to bring back some saltwater taffy if I passed that little shack near Refugio. That was the last I heard from her when the news hit about the flooding. I was in a diner eating dry sausage patties and eggs that tasted like metal. The waitress, Leona, maybe Lisa, kept turning up the volume on the little TV above the cash register. They showed images of neighborhoods underwater. Shimmering rooftops, bobbing lawn chairs, a dog paddling past a drowned Dodge Neon. The voiceover mentioned LaGrange. I dropped my fork, paid in crumpled bills, and tore out of there like I'd left something burning. By the time I got near home, they'd shut down most of the roads. The water was still high in some spots, but you could see the mud lines left, behind where it had been higher. Whole trees ripped from their roots. Stray cattle wandering down Main. My phone was useless, no bars, just that dumb SOS symbol in the corner. I parked the truck a mile out and walked the rest. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe the house tipped sideways into the field. Maybe Cassie sitting on the porch waving like nothing happened. What I didn't expect was silence. The front door was cracked open. Not kicked in, not broken, just hanging ajar like someone had left in a hurry or didn't think it needed closing. The water line hit about waist high on the clapboard siding. Inside, it was a mess. The living room smelled of mildew and rot, the floor sticky with drying mud. The couch had floated to the far wall and wedged itself under the window. Books and pictures lay swollen and warped. Cassie's boots were still by the door. I started, calling her name. Not panicked yet, just loud enough that she'd hear if she was upstairs. But nothing answered. The back rooms were the same, ruined, empty, echoing weirdly. The fridge was on its side in the kitchen. A trail of ants crawled across a shattered picture of us at Pedernales Falls. Upstairs was bone dry. That's what got me. The carpet was dusty, untouched. No water damage, no mold. Just the same as it always was, our old bedrooms, the little half bath in the hall, and the attic door above the linen closet. And that's where I found her. Cassie was curled up on the bed in my old room, her knees to her chest, staring out the window. She didn't blink when I came in, didn't turn her head, just kept staring. I didn't know what to say. I stood in the doorway for what felt like 5 full minutes, my mouth working to form a word that didn't come. Her hair was damp but not wet. Her clothes were clean. Her arms didn't have a single smudge of mud. And the room didn't smell like floodwater. It smelled like cinnamon. Cass? I finally managed. She turned slowly. Her eyes were pale, not like hers, more gray than green, and somehow lighter than the room should have allowed. Her face didn't show anything. No relief, no confusion, no warmth. I waited for you, she said, voice flat as a dry leaf. I stepped closer. Cassie, where were you? I thought you were gone. I checked the shelters, I called. I was here. No, you weren't. The house flooded. I came back and I never left. I didn't understand then. I reached out, touched her arm. Cold. Not like outside cold, but something deeper, like touching the inside of a freezer. She didn't flinch. Just looked at me with those pale eyes and then back out the window. I saw the water come up. She whispered. It filled everything. It was in the vents. In the walls, I heard it in the floor. You got out? She shook her head. I couldn't move. It filled the house, but it didn't touch me. I stayed right here. I backed up a little. The air in the room felt thicker now, like walking through honey. My ears started ringing. Cass, you weren't here. I checked. I came through the house. Your room was empty. I called for you. I heard you, she said, not facing me. You walked right past me. I stopped. That wasn't possible. Her room was wrecked. I remembered the overturned dresser, the mirror cracked in spiderweb lines. I was standing in the hall. She didn't answer, just pressed her face against the glass and muttered something I couldn't hear. What did you say? The house didn't let me go, she said louder. It held me, kept me upstairs. I watched the water rise, but it never touched the steps. Not 1 inch. I watched the things crawl out of the floorboards and slither back down when the light changed. I heard them in the vents. They were in the pipes. I moved toward her again, But the moment I crossed the carpet, something pulled at my ankle, just a tug, but sharp and cold, like fingers made of twine. I looked down. Nothing. No wire, no debris, no shadow. Just clean carpet. Cassie turned and looked at me again. It didn't want me to leave. Not until it was done with everything downstairs. What do you mean? The thing in the drain, she said. The one that knocked. I took a step back. You're scaring me. You think I'm still her? She asked. Her head tilted slowly, neck stiff like a doll's. You think I'm still your sister? The room grew colder. The window fogged on the inside, lines of condensation forming shapes, lines that almost looked like hands. I was here when the house drowned, she whispered. And I'm still here now. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. Not down the stairs, not through the front door. I don't even remember breathing until I was halfway back to the truck. I called the sheriff. They came with 2 deputies and a man from the fire department. They searched the house from top to bottom. There was no one upstairs. No dry carpet. No cinnamon smell. Just water stains, mold, and an old bed that hadn't been slept in for years. They said Cassie's body was found 2 days earlier, face down in a drainage ditch near the highway, 10 miles from the house. But I saw her. She was upstairs, and she was waiting. The wind had started howling around 10:30 that night, ripping through the mesquite trees behind the property like it had a bone to pick with the land. I was alone in my house just off the outskirts of Corpus Christi, down a gravel road. No one bothered to map anymore. I'd lived there for nearly 15 years, a retired lineman who'd seen more storms than most would in 2 lifetimes. Hurricanes, blackouts, downed poles, burnt transformers, you name it, I've dealt with it. But nothing ever rattled me like that night. They'd been talking about the storm for a week straight. Not a named hurricane, but one of those freak inland systems that just parked over the coast and dumped rain like it had a grudge. I wasn't worried, though. I'd prepped like I always did. Bottled water, canned goods, backup batteries. And of course, my generator, a loud old steel beast I bought back in 2009 that had never failed me once. I even replaced the fuel line. Last year, cleaned the carburetor, made sure everything was solid. Around 11, the power went out. The house went pitch black in that sudden, almost surgical way. You never get used to it. I waited a minute, just listening. Rain was hammering. The roof. Wind screaming through the gaps in the boards outside like voices trying to squeeze through cracks. Then I stepped into the mudroom and yanked the cord on the generator. She started up on the first pull, roared like a tiger. Lights flickered. On. The fridge hummed again. The television stayed off. Didn't seem right to watch anything that night. But something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Maybe it was the way the windows kept glowing that eerie yellow, like the house was a jack-o'-lantern, even when the lightning wasn't flashing. I'd seen that before during storms, sure, but this felt different. The light wasn't flickering. It wasn't reacting to the storm. It was steady, constant, like it had its own rhythm. I went into the hallway and stood under the attic hatch, where the ceiling fan was slowly turning even though I hadn't switched it on. I chalked it up to the generator maybe I'd wired it wrong. But I've rewired houses blindfolded in worse conditions, and something about that slow, creeping turn of the fan blades made my stomach twist. By midnight, I started unplugging things. One by one, lamps, the microwave, my laptop, even the fridge. I didn't like the way the shadows were behaving. I'd catch them in the corner of my eye, people-sized, sometimes crouching, sometimes tall and bent, like something mid-motion. But every time I turned, there was nothing. Just that humming from the generator out back and the buzzing from the lights. Sat down in the living room with my flashlight and my old Smith & Wesson just in case. I kept trying to convince myself. It was just the storm, just my nerves. But then came the whispering dot. It wasn't in the walls. It was coming from the floor. I lived alone, no pets, no kids. My wife left me 7 years ago. There wasn't anything that should have been speaking through the floorboards. But the voices came soft and slow, like a group of people standing underneath the floor, murmuring. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was what stuck with me, low, deliberate, and knowing. They weren't confused. They weren't afraid. They were waiting. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. The rain was slashing sideways, stinging my skin. I ran behind the house to where the generator was mounted on the concrete slab, half covered by an aluminum awning. Its casing was hot to the touch. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the fact that I'd already shut off the main transfer switch inside, and the lights in the house were still glowing like it was noon. I flicked the fuel valve off. Nothing changed. I opened the back panel and yanked the spark plug lead. Still running. I stared at it, dripping wet, breath fogging in the cold wind. That generator had no fuel going in, no spark. No output connection to the house anymore. And yet, inside, my ceiling fans were spinning and my kitchen light was shining like a beacon. I turned to the window and saw something staring back at me from inside. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was just a shape, a silhouette behind. The glow. It was hunched, not quite human, its limbs too long, one arm pressed against the glass like it was testing the boundary. And I swear, even with the rain blurring everything, I saw its mouth. Not open, not smiling, just wide, stretched. Like a void in the center of its head. I staggered backward and slipped in the mud, landing hard. When I scrambled up, the shape was gone, but the light was still there, unblinking, dull yellow like spoiled butter. That's when I went for the fuel line. I crawled underneath the generator's housing and sliced through it with my knife. Gasoline. Splashed out, cold and reeking. The engine sputtered and then nothing. Silence. Relief washed over me. I stood up, rain still pounding, and wiped my face with my sleeve. Then it started humming again. No cord to pull. No fuel. No line. Nothing. It just started. Softly at first. Then louder. Until it was the only thing I could hear besides my own heartbeat. I didn't go back in the house. I couldn't. Not after seeing that thing in the window. Instead, I got in my truck and started driving. I didn't stop until I hit the Valero off 286, nearly 20 miles away. I sat in the parking lot until dawn, soaked, shivering, gripping the wheel like it was the last real thing left in the world. When the sun finally came up, I called a buddy of mine, another lineman named Carlos who lived out in Port Aransas. Told him I needed help shutting everything down. Told him not to laugh. Told him I didn't care if it sounded crazy. We drove back together after noon. The storm had passed. The sun was out. The trees were still dripping. My driveway was covered in branches. But the generator wasn't humming. It was gone. Not shut off. Not broken. Gone. The slab was clean. Dry. Not a drop of oil. No fuel smell. The bolts that anchored it were still there, but nothing was mounted to them. We went inside. Everything was dark, silent, no lights, no shadows, but the smell was there. That scorched metal, oily, electrical stink that hits you when a fuse box melts. And upstairs in my bedroom, Carlos found something I hadn't noticed when I'd run the night before. All the bulbs had been removed. From the ceiling fan, the desk lamp, the hallway sconce. Every single bulb, gone. Except for one. My bedside lamp. Still screwed in, still glowing, still humming. I was staying with my sister and Seguin after the storm. just until the roads cleared enough to head back to San Antonio. We didn't get the brunt of the flooding like down in Victoria or Houston, but the water had crept into the lower levels of most homes on her street, including hers. Everything smelled like mildew and rotting wood. The air felt heavy, wet in a way that got into your skin and stuck there no matter how many times you dried off. We didn't have power for 2 days, and by the third, the only thing to do was wait for the sun. And the sound of the pumps stopped. We spent the daylight hours cleaning out what we could, dragging ruined carpets to the curb, piling bags of soaked clothes by the driveway, listening to the occasional whir of a neighbor's generator or the silence that followed when it ran out of gas. It was miserable, but it was still better than sitting inside with the moldy air and the creeping quiet. The kind of quiet that made your ears hum, like your brain was trying to make up for the lack of sound. By the afternoon of the fourth day, my feet were aching. I'd worn cheap old tennis shoes that had no grip left and soaked through from the second hour of moving wet boxes. My socks were stained gray and brown like ash, and my toes felt like they were never going to be dry again. My sister Denise had gone out to check on a neighbor whose sump pump stopped working. So I was alone. I found an old metal bucket in the garage, rinsed it out the best I could, and filled it with water from the edge of the driveway where it pooled near the gutter. It was clear enough. The brown sediment had mostly settled, and the top layer shimmered just a little under the pale sunlight that poked through the clouds. I carried it out back, sat on the concrete stoop behind her kitchen, and eased my sore feet into the water. It was cold and comforting in a strange way, almost cleaner than the house itself. I leaned back against the door and closed my eyes. When I opened them again, I glanced down at the bucket. The surface was calm, but there was something wrong. Stared for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The water was still, but my reflection wasn't. I wasn't smiling, but the face in the water was just the faintest off-kilter smirk, but it was there. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. Maybe it was a trick of the light, but no. When I opened them again, me was still smiling in the bucket. I sat up straight and slowly pulled one foot out, then the other. The ripples distorted the reflection, and for a second I thought maybe it was over. Just my tired brain playing tricks. Just stress, exhaustion, poor lighting. The water stilled again. There she was. My face, still, staring back at me, smiling dotted. Wasn't a friendly smile. It was a knowing one. A private joke I wasn't in on. I pushed the bucket away, hard. It toppled and spilled across the concrete, soaking into the weeds and pooling near the edge of the steps. I didn't even bother to go get a towel. I just stood there barefoot, breathing heavy, watching the water slither toward the dirt. The wind picked up for a moment. Something in it smelled like rain, but older. Like the water hadn't just come from the sky, it had come from somewhere deeper. Somewhere it had no business leaving. That night I couldn't sleep. Denise had come back and brought pizza, but I barely touched it. I didn't mention the reflection. I didn't want her looking at me like I needed rest or medication, but something felt wrong. Around midnight, I got up to use the bathroom. The moonlight came in through the kitchen window and caught the sink full of dishes. Water pooled at the bottom of a mixing bowl left face up. I stepped closer. There it was again. That faint shimmer. That face. Smiling. I backed away slowly and nearly tripped over the cat's water dish. I turned on every light in the kitchen, heart pounding. But now the bowl was just a bowl. The next morning, I was pale and quiet. Denise noticed. Asked if I was okay. I lied. Said I didn't sleep well. She offered to take me back to San Antonio, even though the roads were still risky. I said no. I don't know why. Part of me wanted to stay. Or maybe part of her wanted me too. That afternoon, I went back outside. The sun was out for once, and the water on the ground was finally receding into the soil. I could see the grass again. I didn't. Bring the bucket. I just walked to the edge of the yard and looked down into the ditch that ran along the back fence. There was water there, just a few inches deep, clear, still. I looked in. There were two reflections. Me and her, standing side by side. She was smiling again, and I wasn't. I turned and ran, slammed the back door and locked it. I don't know why I locked it. You can't lock out water. That night I had a dream. I was back at my apartment in San Antonio. The whole place was filled with water, chest deep and black. Furniture floated past me, slow and soundless. And across from me, in the corner, she stood. Same face, same smile. But her eyes were gone, just two hollow shadows. She raised her hand slowly, and so did I. I woke up with my feet soaked. The bedroom window was open and rain had started some time before dawn. But there was no puddle near the window. The carpet was only wet around the bed, and the cat wouldn't come in the room. I packed my things before Denise woke up. Told her I had to go home. She didn't argue. Gave me a hug and said to call her when I got back. I didn't call. I couldn't. When I got to my apartment, it was dry, bone dry. Even the plants had wilted from lack of moisture. It didn't make sense. I went to the bathroom to wash my face. Turned the tap. Water came out slow, reluctant. I leaned in toward the mirror. There she was. But not in the mirror. In the water. Dripping from the faucet. Her face rippling across. Every droplet. Smiling. And then I realized she wasn't outside the glass anymore. She was in me. And this time I was the one smiling. It was the smell that got me first, thick and wet and sour like old towels and fish guts. I'd been a landlord long enough to know the scent of rot when it settled into wood. After the storm tore through Houston, I'd made my way through every unit in the fourplex I owned off Irvington Boulevard. The tenants had all cleared out, just like I'd told them. Power was out, shingles scattered in the street, and the lower floors had taken in water up to the baseboards. But Unit C had something else. Something off. The tenant, a young guy named Rory with too many tattoos and not enough job stability, had left a sticky note on his front door before evacuating. Said he'd tried to tarp the attic hatch to keep it from leaking. The storm must have laughed at him. When I opened the unit's door, it stuck from the swelling. Inside, it reeked of mildew and something else like iron and dirt and a little copper. The drywall on the ceiling was sagging, fat with water. A few of the light fixtures dangled like broken limbs. But it wasn't until I stood beneath the hallway and looked up at the access hatch that I noticed the small puddle of water directly beneath it. Not a lot, just a shallow dish's worth, but it shimmered red at the edges. I'm not a superstitious man. 30 years in Houston with back-to-back floods, heat waves, and hurricanes teaches you to rely on structure, not spook stories. So I got my ladder from the truck, set it up beneath the hatch, and climbed. It groaned when I pushed up the panel. Warm air hit me in the face, wet and close. I shoved my head and shoulders up into the crawl space and froze. There were footprints. On the ceiling. Bare ones. Human. And they were upside down. They started near the far end of the attic and trailed directly over my head to the hatch, like someone had been walking up there while hanging from the roof. They were slick with moisture, fresh. Not old dust or dried mud wet, with little bits of insulation stuck in the ridges. I counted them without meaning to. Left, right, left, 11 steps. Then they just stopped. I ducked down, heart picking up, throat tight. I told myself it was a prank. Maybe some idiot teenager had climbed up there barefoot before the storm and tracked in water, but that made no sense. The prints were too clean, too neat, too orderly. No smudges. No indication of turning around. And they were perfectly spaced. Like someone was standing upright. except on the ceiling. I pulled the hatch closed, stepped down the ladder, and stood in that hallway with my hands on my hips, trying to laugh it off. But I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that the wood hadn't groaned above me. No shifting, no settling. And I hadn't seen any insulation pulled away to show boards or anything that could actually support a person. Not unless they were weightless. Not unless they weren't actually walking. That night, I stayed at the property. Part out of duty, part out of something deeper I didn't want to name. I told myself I was guarding against looters. I had a cot in Unit A's kitchen, flashlight beside me, and a walkie to call my buddy Ray down the block if anything got weird. The air was still humid, even with the windows cracked. I tried to sleep but couldn't shake the feeling of weight above me. Around 2 a.m., I heard it not a creak. Not a squirrel or raccoon clawing. Not even a wind gust against the shingles. It was footsteps, bare, careful, directly overhead. I laid there listening, paralyzed, sweat cold on my chest. They weren't heavy. No boots or shoes. Just that soft, wet splat of skin on wood, slow, measured. 1, 2, 3. I turned off the flashlight and listened harder. My pulse thudded in my ears. The steps passed overhead and stopped right above the hallway. Right above. Where the attic access was, I didn't go back up the ladder the next morning. Instead, I called Ray and asked him to come take a look with me. He was an old drywall guy, knew the bones of buildings better than I did. When we climbed up together into Unit C's attic around 9, the prints were gone. Or almost gone. There were faint smears now, like something had tried to wipe them away. Bits of pink insulation clung to the edges. But one footprint, just one, was crisp as anything I'd seen the day before. It was newer, alone, facing the hatch from the inside. And beneath it, the ceiling wood had bowed slightly, like it had been pressed from the other side. Just once, Ray didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "You ever rent this place to someone with a kid?" "No," I told him. "Why?" He pointed toward the far corner of the attic where the insulation thinned near the eaves. Something was sticking out of the fluff. A torn piece of denim. I walked over and crouched down. It was a child's pant leg. Still damp, when I pulled it free, the cloth came away easily. But underneath was a small bone, pale and delicate, like it had been clean for a long time. Like water hadn't touched it in years. I called the police, of course. Told them I'd found something weird in the attic after the storm. They brought cadaver dogs, forensic kits, the whole deal. Never got a straight answer. They said it could have been animal, but I knew better. A child's femur doesn't look like a raccoon's, and the officer who bagged it didn't look me in the eye. That same night, after the cops left, I stood under the attic hatch again, flashlight in hand. I felt the silence above like it was leaning down. I could almost hear breathing, wet, thin breathing, and something else, like a giggle, but too soft, too controlled, like it was being held in. I left the flashlight on and set it pointing up. At the hatch, I went downstairs. Slept with the radio on dot at 3 a.m. It flickered. The flashlight blinked twice, then cut out. When I climbed the ladder in the morning to check it, the light was dead, and something had scratched around the edges of the hatch from the inside. A name. Over and over. Amy. I looked through every leasing file I had. Rory, the guy who had lived in Unit C, had no family listed. But the tenant before him, a woman named Liza, had an emergency contact. A daughter, Amy. She'd gone missing in 2015. I never got a follow-up from the police. But every now and then, I hear something from that attic. When it rains especially hard, the sounds get louder. Sometimes I leave food up there. Just little things. Crackers, a juice box. The next day they're always gone. But the worst part isn't the sounds, it's the prints. They always come back. Clean, delicate, barefoot, upside down, and now they're not just in the attic. Last week I found a new one on the ceiling of my bedroom at home, in my own house, and this time there were two sets, one big, one small, and they were facing each other. The rain came down in sheets, thick as curtains, and it didn't let up for 2 straight days. We had lived in La Grange for 12 years and seen the Colorado River flood a few times, but nothing like this. This wasn't just water rising. This was something else. It moved fast, swallowed everything, and carried with it a smell like sour meat left in the sun too long. I remember that smell most. It seeped through the walls and into your clothes. We tried to wait it out. My wife, Maria, kept saying the water would recede. But then it started coming up the back steps and the power flickered for the 3rd time. That's when I decided we were done waiting. We packed what we could in garbage bags and pillowcases and waded out to the truck. My boy Jacob clung to my leg the whole time, not because he was scared of drowning, but because he said the water kept trying to pull at his feet. I thought he meant the current. I didn't understand what he meant until later. The road out of town was half washed out, but the bridge held. We didn't look back. Everything we owned was either wet or ruined or floating somewhere in that brown-black flood. We drove west toward Smithville, thinking we'd grab a cheap room and ride out whatever came next. The Super Inn just off the highway looked half empty, lit by a flickering neon vacancy sign and the sick orange glow of the floodlights overhead. The parking lot was dry, but barely. The clerk, a man in a faded fishing hat who looked like he hadn't blinked in hours, handed me the key without asking for a card or cash. Just said, "Room 12," and slid the key across the counter. Didn't even look me in the eye. I asked him if the storm had hit here yet. He said, "Not yet," but the way he said it, it didn't sound like a forecast. It sounded like a warning. Room 12 was at the far end, next to the ice machine that coughed out water and made a rattling sound every few minutes. The inside smelled like mildew and old cigarette smoke. The carpet squished slightly underfoot, but I figured maybe the storm had pushed some water in. Maria started setting up our things, trying to dry off Jacob with one of the scratchy towels. I turned on the bathroom light and stared at the mirror. Not because of anything I saw at first, just because something about the glass caught my attention. The frame was warped, like it had been wet, soaked through and dried again too fast. The glass itself had streaks on it, but not the kind you clean off. These were embedded, like veins beneath skin. I leaned in and touched it, but it felt normal. Cold, solid. We got ready for bed. Maria took Jacob, who was still shaken, and laid him on one of the 2 twin beds. I stretched out on the other and flipped channels, but everything was static. The wind outside started to howl, louder than I remembered hearing in the truck. Sometime after midnight, Maria shook me awake. She didn't speak right away. Her hand was cold on my arm, trembling. "Something's in the bathroom," she whispered. I sat up, listened. The fan over the shower was clicking, like it was trying to turn but couldn't. Then I heard it too, dripping, but steady. Too steady to be a leak. It was like something was tapping rhythmically. Tap, tap, tap. I got up and turned the knob. But the door was stuck. I had to push it hard, and when it swung open, I saw nothing except the mirror. But something was wrong. I stared at our reflection, just me and Maria. She was behind me, holding her breath. But Jacob wasn't. In the reflection, I turned around fast. He was in the bed, sleeping. But in the mirror, there was no third bed. Just us. I tried to laugh it off, told Maria it was the angle. Maybe the mirror was warped or double-sided or something. But then the lights flickered and the reflection smiled. Not us. The reflections. Both of them. My mouth stayed shut, my lips tight. But in the mirror, I was grinning like a clown, wide and toothy. Maria gasped and covered her mouth. Her reflection lifted a finger and ran it along the mirror's inside, drawing something I couldn't make out. And then the bathroom light exploded. We both jumped back as glass rained down from the fixture. The bulb had burst. We didn't sleep again that night. Maria sat on the edge of the bed clutching Jacob, who never stirred. I sat facing the bathroom, waiting. Every now and then, the mirror would catch the dim hallway light that slipped under the door and reflected back, just enough to make you wonder if something was standing there. I should have taken us out right then, but I kept telling myself we were just tired, shocked. Floods mess with your head. But around 3:17 a.m., I heard the shower turn on. No one moved. I walked to the door and pushed it open again. Steam poured out and the light was somehow on again despite the busted bulb. And there, behind the curtain, a silhouette shifted. Slow, like it was swaying. I yanked the curtain aside, nothing. Empty tub. But the steam clung to the mirror, revealing something written backward in the fog. You left me. I wiped it clean, but the words came back. Every time. Even when I breathed on the glass myself, the phrase reappeared. Maria saw it too. I reached for the mirror to see if it was some kind of trick, and the moment my fingers touched it, the surface rippled like water. My hand passed through, just up to the knuckles, like it was submerged. But what I felt on the other side was skin. Not glass, skin, cold and pulsing. I yanked my arm back and a smear of black gunk clung to my wrist. It smelled like the river dot we packed in under 5 minutes. I don't even remember grabbing the keys. We carried Jacob to the car still half asleep. When I turned to look back, room 12's door was open. The light inside was red, not like a bulb, but like a fire was burning just out of view. I swear I saw a figure standing in the mirror, waving. Not mimicking, just waving, like it was saying goodbye. Or maybe warning us not to come back. The clerk was gone. The lobby was dark. No car in the lot but ours. As we pulled onto the highway, the motel behind us faded into the early morning fog, and I started to feel like maybe none of it had happened. Maybe we were just exhausted. Maybe the mirror was cracked. Maybe stress did something to the brain dot. We drove another 50 miles west and found a church shelter. Maria didn't speak for hours. Jacob finally woke up mid-morning and asked if we'd gotten out. I said, "Yeah, we're safe now." He looked at me funny and said, "Then why is that lady still looking at us from the back window?" I turned around. No one was there. Just our reflection in the rearview mirror, smiling. It started 2 days after the rain stopped. The Brazos had overflowed its banks again, choked thick with runoff and broken limbs, and the lower fields behind our property sat still and brown under waist-deep water. The house was on a rise, safe, but just barely. We watched the field flood like we always had, same as it did in '09, same as it had the spring my father passed. I was 17 that summer. Tall but not filled in yet, wiry and sunburnt from hauling fence posts and shoveling gravel. My mother stayed glued to the news on the little TV in the kitchen while I wandered out to the edge of the property every evening, down by the line of old cedar stumps where the grass dipped and the water began. I never waded in. My father always told me you never trust floodwater, it hides more than it shows. And whatever it hides isn't meant to be disturbed. He'd been gone 2 years in July. A stroke took him while he was picking up bags of feed from Caldwell Supply. Just fell to the concrete between the pallets and never stood up again. We buried him in the family plot out behind the barn, next to the stone for Grandpa Jesse and 2 empty markers for my uncles who died overseas. But the night I first heard the voice, it didn't come from the cemetery. It came from the field. It was just past 9. The sky still held that bruised pink you only get in Texas after the clouds start to burn off, but before the humidity settles back down like a wet blanket. I'd walked the fence line like I always did after dinner and stopped at the edge where the cedar stumps leaned like crooked teeth. The water was calm, murky. The tips of grass poked through like drowned hair. And then I heard it. Daniel. A low voice, raspy, drifting out from the flooded field like it rode the mist. My name, not shouted, not panicked. Just spoken plain, like someone was calling me from the porch. I froze. The voice wasn't a guess, not a hallucination. It was my father's, clear as day. That soft gravel drawl, a little hoarse, a little warm. The voice I hadn't heard in 2 years except on the old home videos we never watched. I backed away slow. Didn't run. My brain tried to tell me it was a trick maybe. Someone playing with a speaker or the wind or hell, even some prank. But I couldn't convince myself. Not with the way the hairs rose on my arms, the way the back of my neck tingled like ice was poured down my shirt. I didn't tell Mama. She just started sleeping through the night again after months of waking, up reaching for the other side of the bed. I knew better than to stir up grief, but I went back the next night, and the next, and the voice kept calling, Daniel, son, over here. Each night, it came from a little deeper in. The third night, I stepped into the water. Just my boots, right at the edge. I told myself I only wanted to hear it better. I was stupid. I was 17, but I wasn't imagining it. I could hear the words now with more weight behind them, like the voice had a body somewhere under the surface. You coming, boy? That's what it said on the fifth night. Not, do you hear me? Not help me? But you coming, boy? That's when the dream started. I'd wake up drenched in sweat with my sheets twisted around my legs, the sound of sloshing water in my ears and the smell of mud in my nose. I dreamed of walking into the flood, of sinking, of seeing something down there, just beneath the surface. A figure, smiling, arms stretched toward me. But it wasn't just my father anymore. Not exactly. Its skin was bloated. Its eyes were open but wrong, all pupil and no soul. And the smile was too wide, like someone had cut the edges with a knife. That Sunday, I broke. Mama was cooking bacon, her back to me, humming a hymn. I dropped my fork and said, I've been hearing, Dad. She didn't turn around after a long minute. She said, don't go out there anymore. That's all. No shock, no yelling, like she already knew. Did you hear him too? I asked Dot. She turned off the stove. Then she turned around and looked at me with eyes that had cried too much to cry anymore. Your grandpa Jesse heard his own daddy in that same field, 1962. Said he was standing ankle deep when he saw his pa wave at him from the water. 3 nights later, he walked out and never came back. They found his hat on a fence post. That's it. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My hands were cold. My stomach felt hollow. It's not your father calling you, Daniel, she said quietly. Whatever it is, it wears his voice. That night, I stayed in, locked the door, kept the lights on. I thought that would be enough, but I kept hearing the water outside, not just from the field closer, like it was pooling at the back steps. I checked, dry, but the sloshing never stopped in my ears. Like something had climbed up from the flooded field and stood outside the door, barefoot and dripping. I put in earbuds, played music, still heard him. Daniel, don't let her lie to you. You know me, son. Come see me. It was louder than ever. Inside my head, like he was just behind the door, or under the floorboards. I told myself I was dreaming, but the door handle turned, not rattled. Not shaken. Turned. I grabbed my bat from under the bed and crept toward the door. My hand shook so bad I almost dropped. When I looked through the peephole, no one was there, but the porch was wet soaked I didn't sleep at dawn. I went out back still barefoot, bat in hand, and walked to the edge of the field. Mist rolled in low, hugging the grass like breath from something huge and sleeping. The water was calm. Still, I whispered, "I'm here," and the water moved. A single ripple, then another. Something big. Something slow. Then he rose, not all the way. Just the top half, head and shoulders and chest. My father, but not like I remembered him. His face sagged on one side like it did in the coffin. His shirt was the same one we buried him in, blue plaid, frayed at the sleeves, but soaked, stained, and his eyes were too wide, bloodshot, unblinking. "Come with me, Daniel," he said, in a voice that was almost right. "Almost. I miss you, Dad," I whispered. He smiled, but only with his mouth. "Then come." He held out his hand, and I stepped forward. My foot hit the water and sank deep. Not soft, not like mud. Like the water swallowed it. Like it wanted to pull. I stepped back. His smile faded. "You're not real," I said. "You're." Not him. He didn't argue. He just sank straight down. No splash. The water was still again. I ran. I never went back. We moved that fall. Sold the property to a cousin who only uses it for hay now. He said he'd drain the field when he got time. But I know he hasn't. I checked satellite images. It's always wet. Even when the rest of the county dries up, that field stays brown and drowned. Last I heard, his dog went missing, and his youngest swears he hears someone whispering his name. When he walks too close to the edge. It's never the same voice twice. The floodwaters hadn't fully receded in Waco by the time the second round of volunteers rolled in from Temple. It was late July, and the air reeked of mold and rot, thick with heat and gnats that seemed to swarm around every inch of skin. Streets still glistened with the oily sheen of water, trees bowed with debris like mourning figures, and houses sat partially collapsed or swallowed up to the windows in brown slush. The Brazos had risen overnight, swallowing neighborhoods that hadn't seen a serious flood in 50 years. Rescue teams had been at it for days. We were exhausted, legs blistered, radios crackling nonstop, and still people kept waving us down. From porches and rooftops, their faces pinched in panic. It was late afternoon when the call came about the White House off Ivy Street, the one with the green shutters, and the sagging porch that looked like it had buckled under the weight of too many summers. Dispatch said someone had seen movement inside from a canoe. No one had come out, no sign of power. A man was spotted at the upstairs window early that morning, but by the time the National Guard boats made it around, the water had climbed so high they couldn't dock, and no one answered the bullhorns. Our crew was stretched thin. Just 4 of us went in: me, Ray, Hernandez, and Bryce. We tied off at the telephone pole and sloshed knee-deep through water that smelled like sewage and something worse. We were wearing rubber boots, chest waders, and masks that were supposed to help with mold, but nothing really kept the smell out. The front door had cracked off its hinges, swinging loose like it was barely held together by a cobweb. Inside, the house groaned and shifted under our feet like it was alive. Wood swollen soft with water, wallpaper curling like it was trying to get away. The downstairs was wrecked couch overturned, pictures floated in the murk, a soaked Bible rested half open on the stairs. Bryce called up, "This is emergency services. If anyone's here, call out." Nothing, just the sound of dripping water and the occasional creak, like the house was taking slow breaths. We took it slow going up the stairs. That's where they'd seen the man in the window, and by the looks of it, the water hadn't yet touched the top floor. I remember how dark it was, like the light didn't want to go in. Even with our headlamps on, the shadows felt too heavy, like they pulled back when you looked and closed in behind you when you turned away. The hallway upstairs had 4 doors, 3 closed, 1 half open. We moved in a line. I took the first room, which looked like a kid's nursery walls painted with fading stars and moons, crib overturned, stuffed animals sodden and covered in black mold. Nothing living. Just a cold draft coming from the vent. That shouldn't have been blowing. Bryce took the second room. A bedroom. The mirror above the dresser was broken down the center, splitting our reflections like knife wounds. He muttered something I didn't catch and backed out fast. Shaking his head, Hernandez checked the third, bathroom. The tub was half filled with murky water. He said it smelled like old meat, but I didn't stick around to test the theory. Ray had gone straight to the half-open door at the end. That's where the window was, the one where the man had been seen. Ray was quiet for a long time. I remember standing at the nursery door, watching him edge in. "You see anything?" I asked. He didn't answer, just stared ahead, not moving. "Ray?" I said again, walking closer. Still nothing. I reached the doorway and froze. I didn't step in, and to this day I don't know why. Maybe something in me recognized the wrongness before I could name it. Maybe my body had more sense than my mind. The room wasn't empty, but it wasn't full either. There was space. Too much of it. The ceiling seemed higher, the walls longer. The angles weren't right. I know how that sounds, but it's true. The wallpaper faded stripes ran in strange patterns, like it shifted when you blinked. The window where the man had been seen stood open, curtains soaked and limp, blowing inward despite the still air. Ray took one step forward and said, "There's someone here." He whispered it like he was telling a secret. I blinked. There wasn't anyone there. Not that I could see. Bryce called out again, "Ray, let's go." Ray didn't move. Hernandez stepped forward to grab his arm. The moment his hand touched Ray's shoulder, he jerked like he'd been shocked. Then he looked at me, eyes wide. "We need to go," he said, but I started. "No," he cut me off. "We leave. Now." Bryce didn't argue. I hesitated. For a moment longer, trying to look into that room. Trying to figure out what had changed. That's when Ray turned. He smiled at me. It wasn't a normal smile. His mouth moved, but the rest of his face didn't. It was like someone had put the expression on him, like a mask sliding into place. And his eyes, they weren't Ray's. They were too dark. "Too still," he said. "Tell my wife I'm not cold anymore." And then the room went dark. Just for a second. Like a blink. When the light came back, Ray was gone. No splash. No sound. No footsteps. Just gone. We tore out of the house. Didn't say a word. Didn't look back. When we hit the porch, Bryce fell into the water trying to untie the boat and came up gasping like he'd been held under. Back at the station, we reported what we could. Left out the worst parts. Nobody asked too many questions. Official report said Ray was lost during rescue, presumed drowned. House collapsed later that night from rot. No recovery possible. I tried calling his wife. She wouldn't answer. 3 days later, she showed up at the station. Her hands were shaking. She'd gotten a call. From Ray's phone. Voicemail. It said, "Don't come looking. It's warm here." The number disconnected when they tried calling back. They brought in divers a week later. Nothing found. Not even debris. Months passed. Hernandez quit 2 weeks later. Moved out of state. Sighed he couldn't sleep anymore. Said the room kept changing every time he closed his eyes. Bryce ended up in therapy. He wouldn't talk about it. The only thing he ever told me, after a night of drinking, was that he saw someone standing in the mirror behind Ray before he disappeared. Someone wearing his face. Me. I still go on calls, still walk through flooded houses and broken homes. But I don't go in alone, ever, and I never, ever step through a door that's already open. The water was rising fast that night in Rosenberg. I remember the sound more than anything, the deep, endless hush of rain hitting the rooftops, trees groaning under the wind, and somewhere far off, the hollow boom of transformers blowing one by one like distant artillery. My boy Caleb had been asleep in his room when the siren started. I grabbed him, his backpack, my phone, nothing else. We lived in a one-story house near the creek, and when it floods, it doesn't come politely. It comes as a wall, and it doesn't knock out. By the time we were wading through the living room, the water was up to my thighs. Furniture floated past us. I couldn't see the floor anymore, just dark shapes shifting beneath the surface, like the house had become an aquarium and all the old secrets were swimming free. I held Caleb against my chest, telling him over and over to hold on, hold on. He didn't speak. He just pressed his face into my neck and wrapped his arms around me so tight it hurt. Outside was worse. The street was gone. Everything was water. The neighbor's oak had fallen across their roof, splitting it like a rotten pumpkin. The mailbox was under water. Power lines crackled overhead. The wind whipped rain sideways, so it felt like we were walking through sheets of nails. I kept moving because if I stopped, I wouldn't start again. That's how it works in panic. You keep going or you drowned out. At the end of the street was the rise. It's just a little hill that leads to the overpass, but it was higher ground. I could see the headlights of other families already up there, clustered like fireflies. I started toward it, dragging my legs through water that kept getting deeper. Caleb was shivering. I could feel him trembling in my arms. I said his name. He didn't respond, just held on. The current started pulling sideways as we crossed the middle of the street, and for one terrifying moment I thought we'd be swept into the drainage ditch. I lost my footing and staggered. My knees slammed into something sharp, maybe a fence, maybe debris. I screamed but didn't let go. I never let go. I just shifted Caleb to my left arm and used the other to grip a floating trash can, dragging us forward. That's when a hand grabbed mine. It was small, child-sized, cold and slick with water. My first thought was, thank God, Caleb's helping me. He's reaching out. Maybe he's trying to swim too. He held my hand tight. I squeezed back hard. I remember thinking, that's good, baby, hold on. Just hold on. The hand didn't move like Caleb's. It didn't pull or push or climb. It just held on. No trembling, no hesitation. Just a steady grip. I kept walking, never questioning it, never daring to look. I didn't look because I thought if I turned my head and slipped, we'd both go under. It wasn't until I reached the base of the hill that I saw Caleb. He was standing at the top, with a woman in a red hoodie holding a flashlight behind him. He was dry. His hair was matted, but his face was calm. Confused but not scared. He called to me, "Mom?" I froze. I looked down. The boy in my arms was pale. His head was turned into my neck. I shifted him, and when I saw his face, I screamed. I screamed so loud it didn't sound human. It wasn't Caleb. It looked like him at first, same size, same clothes, even the little dinosaur patch I'd sewn on the left knee. But the skin was wrong, too white. Not pale like fear, but gray-white like something that had been in the water too long. The lips were blue. The eyes were closed. He wasn't breathing. The thing holding my hand under the water didn't let go. I dropped the knot. Caleb. It didn't splash. It just slipped beneath the surface like it had been waiting. The hand vanished. I scrambled up the hill, knees bleeding, lungs heaving, until I collapsed next to my real son, sobbing and shaking and trying to explain. I told them I found him in the house. I told them I carried him the whole way. I told them he held my hand and wouldn't speak. I told them everything, every detail I could remember. And then the woman in the red hoodie said the words I still hear every night before I fall asleep. I found your boy 10 minutes ago. He was knocking on car windows, crying for his mom. He's been up here the whole time. They checked for hypothermia. They asked about trauma. They said maybe it was shock or hallucination or some kind of stress response. The M told me people imagine all kinds of things during floods. It's common. The brain protects itself, but I know what I carried. I know what held my hand. Later, I walked back down the hill with a flashlight against the advice of the responders. The water was lower by then. You could see pieces of furniture, toys, even a white teddy bear caught in the branches of a tree. I found Caleb's shoes floating side by side. Not the ones he was wearing. The old ones. The ones I'd thrown out last week. In the spot where I dropped that thing, where I realized I was holding something else, I found a child's backpack. The zipper was open. Inside was a laminated school ID, soaked and curling at the edges. The photo showed a boy with shaggy blonde hair and a toothy smile. His name was Gabriel. He wasn't mine. He'd been missing since the last flood. That was 2 years ago. Don't walk near water anymore. I don't bathe alone. I can't stand the sound of rain on the roof. And sometimes, when I'm holding Caleb's hand walking to the store or across the parking lot, I squeeze too hard. Because now I always check. I check to make sure it's warm. I check to make sure it squeezes back. I check to make sure it's not just holding on. Because once, just once, it wasn't my son's hand I held, and it never let go. Not really. It started with the rain. Not the kind that creeps in like a whisper, but the kind that screams sideways across the windshield and turns every mile into a gamble. Lavra had been driving northeast out of San Marcos, heading toward some back road. Coordinates where a dispatch call had reported 2 elderly residents stranded in a nursing cottage. She was used to bad conditions, being a traveling nurse in Texas meant knowing how to find your way through flash floods and power outages, but this storm felt angry, not natural. Like it had a personal stake in keeping people away from wherever she was going. Her GPS flickered in and out as the black clouds swirled above, coughing out bolts of lightning that lit the road in violent flashes. Her knuckles were white on the wheel when she spotted the town sign through the downpour. A rusted metal post, bent at an angle like something had slammed it years ago and no one had bothered to fix it. It said, "Welcome to Nolan's Hollow. Pop, 193. She slowed down, squinting through the wiper blades at the dim outline of homes beyond the sign. There was a gas station with one flickering overhead light and a tiny Baptist church whose steeple had lost its cross. A diner sat dark across the road, its windows reflecting the occasional glow of lightning like blank eyes. A few houses lined the narrow street, their porch swings swaying wildly in the storm wind, though she couldn't see anyone. No people, no movement. Just the eerie sense of something watching her from behind every window. She pulled over beside the diner, rolled her window down slightly, and called dispatch on her radio. No response. The static was loud and erratic, like it was choking on the storm. She leaned out and yelled into the wind. "Hello? Anyone need help?" Nothing. Just the groaning creak of the diner's sign as it twisted on its rusted chain. Reached for her flashlight, intending to knock on the diner's door and see if anyone was inside. But something about the air stopped her. It had that charged, metallic heaviness that sometimes comes before a tornado, but more than that, it felt wrong, like the air had teeth. She looked back toward the town sign, then back at the buildings. The storm seemed to hush around her for a second, as if holding its breath. Then, without warning, the floodlight from the gas station blew out in a burst of sparks. The entire stretch of road went black. In that split second before her headlights kicked back in, she thought she saw something moving. No, many things just beyond the reach of her beams, shapes, shifting between the buildings. Low to the ground but fast, like wolves crawling over broken furniture. She threw the van in reverse, backed out into the wet road, and gunned it back toward the highway. Her breath was ragged, hands trembling. She didn't look in the rearview mirror. Not once. She just drove until she hit dry pavement again and the radio crackled back to life. The next morning, after getting emergency clearance and reporting the mysterious call, she returned with a rescue crew, 2 local deputies, a Red Cross volunteer, and a FEMA guy with drone equipment. Lavra rode shotgun, her eyes glued to the roadside. She knew where she had turned, knew the exact point where she saw the sign, but when they got there, the sign was gone. So was the road it marked. They pulled over. The pavement just stopped. Beyond the edge was nothing but thick woods, thick with pine and underbrush and the chirr of cicadas like summer static. The FEMA guy checked the GPS data, frowning. We should be inside a town's boundary. That's what the records say. Nolan's Hollow registered back in the 30s, but he tapped his tablet. But it was marked as condemned in 1986. Completely destroyed in a sinkhole. There's no one out here. Hasn't been for decades. Lavra stared into the woods. The trees looked old, ancient even. Too wide, too thick for what should have been there. She pushed into the brush anyway, ignoring the stares of the others. She knew what she'd seen, but after a few yards, the woods swallowed the light. The trees blocked the sun like walls, and the air turned heavy again. The smell of mold and wet wood made her gag. She caught glimpses of broken things buried in the earth, fragments of metal, old porch steps, a boot half-eaten by moss. At one point, she nearly tripped over a mailbox lying in the dirt, its paint long faded, the name smeared beyond recognition. She looked up then and saw the outline of a church spire or what was left of it. Just the tip of the steeple poking out between 2 twisted trees. The wood had blackened with age, and the shingles were peeling like dried skin. She turned back to call for the others, but the woods behind her had shifted. The path was gone. She was surrounded. The buzzing of insects rose into a scream. For a moment, it felt like the trees were leaning in closer, pressing in around her, closing off the light entirely. She spun around, heart pounding, and pushed toward where she thought the road had been. But all she saw was bark and roots and shadows. Then she heard something whisper her name. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even threatening, but it was close. So close that the breath from it touched the back of her neck. She ran. Branches clawed her arms and legs, ripped her sleeves. She ran until the light returned, until the noise faded, and until she stumbled back into the clearing where the rescue team stood, confused and wide-eyed. "Where the hell did you go?" one of them asked. "I didn't go far," she said, panting. "I was just right there." "There's nothing back there," the deputy muttered. "Just woods. No signs of anything ever being here." But Lavra knew what she'd seen. She knew. The steeple, the diner, the crooked porch swing. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept playing back the image of the rusted sign, of the wet windows reflecting her headlights, of the empty building standing quiet in the storm. And just as she drifted into uneasy dreams, her phone buzzed. It was a voicemail from an unknown number. The static was sharp, like wind pressing through a tunnel. Then came a voice, faint but clear. "You shouldn't have come back." She dropped the phone. Her skin went cold. The next morning, she tried to trace the call. Nothing came up. Not even a record of the voicemail. That was 2 years ago. She never found Nolan's Hollow again. Not on maps, not in dispatch archives, not even in satellite images. But sometimes late at night when she's driving on Texas roads, she sees. something out of the corner of her eye. A bent metal sign, rusted and crooked, flashing past in the rain. Sometimes, just sometimes, she hears her name again. And every time she does, her radio cuts out, and the air smells like wet wood and mold. She's not sure what Nolan's Hollow was, or is, but she knows this. Towns can die. They can vanish. But that doesn't mean they stay dead. Some places keep breathing long after they're buried. The storm rolled in with the same kind of thick, heavy quiet that settles before something breaks. It was the kind of storm that didn't bark on arrival, it crept. It had been forecast for days across central Texas, but warnings didn't matter. Much out here near Bastrop, especially to Mitch. He'd grown up in that house, tucked away past the pine thickets and red dirt roads that peeled off from the main highway. He wasn't scared of a little thunder and wind, no matter how wild the radio said it'd get. He'd lost power plenty of times growing up. What was different now? Except he was older, lived alone. And after the last flood 3 years ago, the back pasture still sagged with mud and standing water after even a modest downpour. The old place was starting to feel less like home and more like something half swallowed by the earth. His parents had passed. His sister had moved to Oregon. Only his brother Josh came by once every few months. Mitch liked the solitude. He liked the quiet dot, so when the storm hit a day earlier than predicted and the wind started howling like something. In pain, Mitch did what he always did. He turned off the porch light, locked the doors, unplugged the electronics, and curled up in his bedroom with a flashlight, a cooler full of water, and a full charge on his phone. He never liked using the phone for much more than messages and YouTube videos, but that night he did something different, something strange for him. Around 10:15 p.m., as the wind started hammering the shutters and the trees groaned against one. Another outside like fighting beasts, he hit the record button on his voice memo app, placed the phone on his nightstand, and slid under the covers. He'd read something online, probably Reddit, about how people sometimes talked in their sleep during intense weather, and he figured maybe he'd catch something. Or maybe it was a deeper itch, something quieter and harder to explain, like a subconscious fear whispering, "Record this. You'll want to know." He doesn't remember falling asleep, only the distant thunder pacing like footsteps through the woods. And the slow, occasional sound of rain tapping the windows like someone too polite to knock the next morning. The power was still out. The sky was that dull, washed-out gray that hangs around too long after a storm like it's sorry for what it did. Mitch felt strange. Not sick, exactly, but off. Like he'd spent the night half awake in a fever dream. His pillow was damp and not from sweat. His right foot, the one that always stuck out from under the blanket, was muddy. That stopped him. He stared at it. The covers were dry, no sign of tracking anything in. But the foot itself, ankle down, was caked in thin, gritty mud. The kind you'd find outside near the well. He got up slowly, tested his legs, and walked barefoot to the bathroom, leaving prints he didn't want to see behind him. The water ran rusty for a second, then clear. He scrubbed his foot and tried not to look at the drain dot. It took until late afternoon before he remembered the recording. The phone was still on the nightstand, face down, battery at 12%. He picked it up, thumbed over the screen, and stared at the audio file. Sleepwreck_storm_night.m4a. Runtime, 7 hours, 22 minutes. He sat on the edge of the bed and hit play. It was mostly wind at first. Wind and the occasional long stretch of silence. Every now and then, a muffled shifting of sheets, the soft breath of someone deep in sleep. He fast-forwarded. 4 hours in, there was a sharp tapping 5 taps, deliberate and evenly spaced. He paused, went back 10 seconds, listened again. It wasn't the window. It wasn't the door. It sounded like it came from inside the room, then a pause. Then the sound of something like fingers dragging across wood. He muted it and stared at the wall. The tapping had matched the rhythm of the old headboard. The one with the claw marks on the underside. He'd always blamed the family dog when he was a kid. But there'd never been a dog. He texted Josh, "You around? Weird night. Come by if you get the chance. Bring headphones." Josh came that evening. The storm had left most of the road sloppy but drivable. Mitch didn't say much. He just handed over the phone and pointed to the time stamp. Josh sat there for a long time, listening. After the first few minutes, his face got tight. His jaw locked up in that way it always did when he didn't want to show he was scared. At the 6-hour mark, Josh paused the recording and stood up. "That wasn't you breathing," he said quietly. Mitch shook his head. "That was something in the room. I heard it crawl." They didn't listen to the last hour. Josh wouldn't. Mitch tried once, a few nights later, after a few beers and a dumb sense of courage. The breathing got louder, ragged, like something struggling to mimic sleep but not understanding how. There were sharp intakes, wet clicks, then a sound like a mouth trying to speak with no tongue. He turned it off and deleted the file. Or thought he did, because every night since, the phone regenerates the file. Same title, same length, same timestamp. He's wiped the device twice, bought a new one. But every morning, after the first heavy sleep, the file returns. The sound file now starts with a whisper, "Can you hear me now?" Mitch sleeps less these days. He keeps all the lights on. The window's shut even when it's 100 degrees outside. And the bed is covered in plastic, every corner duct taped to the frame. He's nailed the headboard to the wall, but every few nights, he wakes up with dirt under his fingernails and water in his ears. The last time Josh came to visit, he found Mitch curled up in the hallway, whispering to the phone. "Play it back," he kept saying. "Play it back. I need to hear where it went this time." Josh picked up the phone. There was no new file. Only one saved in a folder labeled "Saved from Recording." It was titled, "I'm in the floor now." And this time, the voice was Mitch's, speaking slowly, clearly. "Don't come back here, Josh. You were right. It's not the storm. It was never the storm. It waits until I sleep. And now I think I'm sleepwalking into places that don't exist." That night, Josh slept in the truck. The next morning, the house was locked, the curtains drawn. Mitch's muddy footprints led back and forth from his bedroom to the attic door, then stopped. Josh didn't go up there. The phone was found on the nightstand, recording. The last 10 seconds, breathing, slow, wet, followed by 4 words that didn't belong. To Mitch, still here, still listening. It started the morning after the water retreated, when the last truck from FEMA rattled down the county road and left nothing but mud, silence, and the stench of rot. I stood at the end of my gravel driveway, or where it used to be, and stared at the gaping wound in the earth where my house once stood. Gone. No twisted lumber, no roof shingles wedged into the branches, not even the metal rooster I'd bolted to the porch railing back in 2003. Just gone. In its place, maybe 20 feet from where the porch steps should have been, sat a dome of stone. Not a pile of debris, not river rocks, not limestone from the hill country. Something else. Something darker. The stones shimmered in the gray morning light, even though the sun hadn't fully risen. Each one the color of wet slate, stacked with a precision that made my throat tighten. Like someone or something had placed them deliberately. I should have turned around right then, packed my things, and stayed at my sister's longer. But I didn't. It was my land, damn it. The house might be gone, but this patch of Texas soil was all I had left of my husband. Of the 30 years we spent together, of the pecan tree we planted the year we found out we couldn't have children. That tree was still there, tilted a little, bark stripped on one side like it had been clawed by something bigger than a storm. But alive. The stone mound was about 8 feet across, 4 feet high, smooth as river pebbles, but too sharp, too unnaturally uniform. I tried circling it once, squelching through the mud in my rubber boots. Every time I turned to walk away, I swore I heard something behind me. Not footsteps, more like breath. Like the land itself was exhaling. On the third day, when I came, back with bottled water and a tarp for shade, I heard the humming. Faint at first, low and metallic, like the drone of power lines or an old freezer coil. But steadier, rhythmic. I pressed my hand against the mound, half expecting it to be cold. It wasn't. It was warm, damp, pulsing dot. By the fourth night, I couldn't sleep. I'd parked the truck where the driveway used to meet the road, but I left the windows rolled up, the doors locked. Not because I was afraid of looters, there was nothing to steal, but because I didn't want to hear the thing humming in the dark. But I did. Even with the windows shut and my old raincoat pulled over my head, I heard it. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a feeling. Like something was brushing the inside of my skull, whispering in a language that didn't belong to anything living. I stopped telling people about it after the second call to the sheriff's office. First time, Deputy Holloway came out, shined his flashlight around like he was humoring me, then left with a shrug and a cigarette tucked behind his ear. Second time, they didn't bother. Said I was probably still in shock. Trauma, they called it. Post-event hysteria. They hadn't lost everything. They didn't stand in a field that used to be their home and feel the ground vibrate under their boots. They hadn't seen the prints dot because on the fifth morning, there were prints. Not from boots, not from paws. Long thin grooves 5 on. Each side trailing from the base of the mound into the woods behind the old property line. I followed them. I didn't want to, but I couldn't help it. It was like they reached into me and tugged. The mud was drying, but the grooves were fresh, wet at the bottom like something slick had dragged itself along. I found bits of my house in the woods, a half-melted spatula, the corner of a picture frame, glass shattered, my husband's smile just barely visible beneath the grime. But no walls, no foundation, just those grooves leading deeper into the trees. I turned back after half a mile when I realized the woods had gone quiet. No birds, no insects, not even wind. Like the air was holding its breath, the dream started. That night, I saw the mound from above, the way you might see something while floating, untethered. Except it wasn't just a mound. It was a lid, a cap on something buried, something waiting. And below it, darkness moved like water, thick and full of teeth. I woke with mud on my fingers, even though I hadn't left the truck. 2 days later, the ground around the mound started to crack. Hairline at first, barely visible. By sundown, the cracks had widened, like the earth was pulling away from the mound in disgust. The humming got louder. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I started seeing things. Not shadows. Not figures. In the distance. No, these were things up close. Reflected in puddles that weren't there a moment ago. Glimpsed in the side mirror of the truck. Smiling when I wasn't. Things with my husband's voice calling my name from the trees. Begging me to come see. Come listen. Come understand. The final night, the sky turned yellow-black like the sun. Had drowned. I stood by the mound, barefoot in the cracked dirt. The air felt charged, the way it does before a lightning strike, but worse. My skin buzzed, my teeth ached, and the mound was bleeding. Slow, syrupy fluid leaked from between the stones, blacker than motor oil, steaming in the cool air. I don't remember falling to my knees. I only remember the sound. Not humming anymore, singing, low and choral, like 100 voices buried underwater, each one layered over the next in impossible harmony. It wasn't a melody. It was a summons. I leaned in. I didn't want to. God help me, I didn't want to. But something in that sound hooked into my spine and pulled. I touched the stone, and it moved. It slid inward like a puzzle piece finding its place, then another, and another, until the mound wasn't a mound anymore. It was a hole. I never saw the bottom, only the heat rising from it, and the smell. Burnt hair and sweet rot. Something was inside, something old, something buried long before my house stood there, long before this town had a name, something the flood woke up or uncovered, or fed. I don't remember crawling away. I only remember waking up in the middle of the road, miles from the site. A stranger found me, muttering, hands raw, eyes swollen. They took me to a clinic. The mound? It was gone, vanished. The land was flat, churned up like nothing had ever been built there. No stone, no cracks, no prints, but I know what I saw. And I know what's still down there, somewhere deeper. The flood didn't just take my house. It gave something back. A gate, a mouth. And for one night, I opened it. Every time it rains now, I hear that humming in my dreams. And I know someday, when the earth splits again and the water returns, it'll come calling. And next time, it won't need me to open the stones. It'll open them on its own.